Hello there, and welcome to the planet's memory, where curiosity doesn't have to hurry and wonder is allowed to linger as long as it needs. Tonight, we begin a long, gentle drift into a question that feels both impossible and quietly inviting. What if the Earth remembered? Not in the way we do, with fragile moments pressed into the tissue of our minds, but in silence and stone. What if the shifting of continents, the movements so slow we cannot sense them, are not just accidents of physics, but part of a memory far larger than any of us? You might feel it already, the strange pull of this thought, like standing at the edge of water at dusk, when ripples fold into one another, and for a moment the lake feels alive with recollection, as if it has watched every leaf fall, every footstep press its shore. That suggestion that the planet might itself be a witness doesn't require belief in anything beyond what is already here. Because stone remembers, dust remembers, isotopes, locked away in minerals, can last longer than empires. You and I may never meet the future eye to eye, but molecules do. If you were to hold a pebble in your hand now, it would look quiet, unremarkable, only a fragment of some larger whole. And yet that tiny piece of matter might have lain at the bottom of an ancient ocean, compressed by unimaginable forces, folded between drifting plates until it emerged again in daylight, placed unknowingly in your palm. That single pebble has felt more than we ever will. It has slid beneath the crushing weight of glaciers and has drifted on volcanic steam. This texture is memory. The silence is memory. And in that silence, we might sense a strange companionship with Earth, as though it too carries echoes of things lost. Could it be that our continents, those vast plates of rock that restlessly glide across the mantle, are shaping more than landscapes? Could they be curating stories hidden within their folds? Not because they want to, but because matter cannot help but bear the scars of time. A mountain does not intend to remember, and yet erosion etches a diary along its cliffs. The ocean does not aim to preserve, but sediments pile in exquisite, delicate layers, one upon another, each thin sheet of silt recording what the air smelled like, what the rivers carried, what the wind whispered that day. It is less like memory as we know it and more like a slow archive. A billion-year library carved without words, traced only in dust. Deep time itself makes the idea both impossible to hold and too haunting to ignore. A span of 1,000,000 years is hard enough to imagine, but the Earth measures in billions. Over that enormity, continents have broken apart, rejoined, and fallen away again. If we could speed time up, we would see landmasses drift as though floating on breath, colliding and separating in a choreography we were never meant to observe. Africa kisses South America, drifts away, and then finds itself again in a future ocean. Smaller lands shatter into archipelagos, new seas bloom between ridges, mountain ranges fall without ceremony. And yet, even in their falling, something remains. Minerals record climate in their isotopic bones. Erosion leaves faint trails like handwriting dissolving but not erased. If memory is simply what endures, then Earth remembers more faithfully than we do. And maybe, just maybe, the Earth remembers us too, or will. We often think we are impermanent, destined to vanish beneath entropy. And yes, much of us will. Cities will crumble faster than mountains drift. Steel will rust, glass will shatter, paper will dissolve into soil. But even so, the crust may take impressions of us. Plastics may fossilize. The smallest of coins may fall into silt. Our isotopic footprint may become a whisper that lasts longer than our languages. It is not the kind of remembrance that comforts us, no monument or story told exactly as we like. It is instead the memory of chemistry and residue, traces we cannot choose to erase. When we consider this, the question grows wider. If the continents remember each age in their shifting, if dust carries the signatures of stars and volcanic glass preserves the fire of long-dead eruptions, then what of civilizations older than we imagine? Could we already be walking upon the ghosts of forgotten epochs, erased not by neglect, but by the steady tide of geology? What if the continents have shifted enough times that memories of entire worlds lie crushed in trenches, subducted into mantle heat, erased and rewritten like palimpsests made of stone? Scientists admit there are gaps, chasms in the record where erosion or subduction has stripped away millions of years with barely a trace left behind. What if the Earth once sang other songs, carried other minds, lost not because history was rejected but because the planet itself turned the page? And still, even in that erasure, there is presence. A lost civilization, if one ever existed before us, might still be here in echoes we call technofossils, the faintest anomalies in a clay bed, an unexpected isotope ratio, a shard of glass too pure to be natural. Maybe nothing is truly forgotten. Maybe everything leaves behind its faintest ash. And if that is true, then Earth's memory does not merely hold geology, it holds identity. What became of them? What will become of us? What will endure long after the last starling has fallen silent? If we place a hand gently on stone, if we listen to the hush of wind moving through fossil cliffs, we might sense this memory even if we can't read it. Not as voices, not as pictures, but as weight. The feeling that something beyond our short lives is here with us, waiting without impatience, carrying ages upon ages within its quiet form. That subtle weight might be all the evidence we ever receive. And it might be enough. And yet, if this much can be carried within silence, if stones and oceans and drifting continents can remember more than we ever can, then what else might we have already forgotten, resting unspoken just beneath our feet? To search for the answer, we must look down, deeper than the soil we walk upon, deeper even than bedrock, into the realm beneath the crust itself. There, the world behaves differently, a place where time and heat blur, and where movement is measured not in hours or days, but in millions of years. Down there, the continents themselves ride quietly on rivers of stone. Imagine it gently, not as fire and fury, though it can be that too, but as a slow tide, invisible to us, rising and sinking, always alive. Heat from the Earth's core, born in part from the radioactive decay of ancient isotopes, makes rock flow, not quickly, not like water pouring from a stream, but like honey thickened beyond recognition. It deforms, it moves, it carries slabs of land the way a dream carries fragments of memory. When we look at a map of the world and see coastlines tracing familiar outlines, we are only catching a moment, a single shape in a story that has never stood still. Beneath every step we take, pressure builds in silence. Entire continents can grind against one another, their motions so gradual they seem still, and yet, their collisions have raised mountains taller than imagination and oceans wider than belief. The Himalaya began from such a meeting, stone pressed into sky as if the earth itself were exhaling upward. Elsewhere, plates sink, plunging into trenches, swallowed back into the mantle in a patient cycle of erasure and renewal. To watch a continent disappear into that darkness is to understand how completely entropy folds all beginnings into endings, and all endings back into unseen beginnings. Rock does not resist. It bends, it melts, and eventually, it becomes part of something unseen until it rises again, as new crust forming on the floor of the sea. And this too leaves record, not in words, but in minerals, in isotopic trails that mark where oceans rose and fell, where climates shifted, where eras folded into each other like breaths. Listening for these movements is like sitting at the edge of silence, waiting for a whisper deep below. Seismic waves ripple outward from every quake and every crack, echoes that reveal the shape of what lies hidden. By following their travel, scientists map the invisible. Hot plumes rising like smoke and stone, slabs falling into mantle darkness, ridges where new crust is born. And while we might think of quakes as violent interruptions, they are instead reminders that beneath the crust, the world is always breathing. Slow, deep, continuous. A breath drawn not in air, but in motion, in cycles vast enough to reset oceans and erase mountains, time and time again. What would it mean, then, if this movement too was a kind of memory? A memory not of events, but of processes, repeating endlessly, carrying echoes through pressure and heat. When a plate drifts inches each year, it is easy for us to call it static. But what if that drift is a rhythm, kept faithfully for billions of years? Could the Earth's mantle be not only force, but voice, telling us the same dream over and over, one we can barely understand? Not because we lack imagination, but because its timescale excludes us. We are born, we live, we fade, all before a single continent has shifted from its place. To the Earth, we might seem like sparks in the dark, momentary, gone in the space between two beats of its stone heart. And still, there is awe in that smallness. To picture rocks in steady rivers of pressure is to imagine silence as a dynamic thing, alive even when unmoving, purposeful even when without purpose. We can think of continents not as wanderers, but as passengers, floating on invisible oceans of rock. Each drift will reshape the sky, alter wind and current, birth new climates, erase old ecosystems. Nothing stays, and yet everything is carried forward. What feels to us like permanence, the mountain, the shore, the plain, becomes only a temporary arrangement, already in the process of departure, which makes us wonder, if beneath our feet the very ground moves without rest, if all permanence is shifting, then what does it mean when we speak of home, of foundation, of belonging? Perhaps, like the plates themselves, belonging is not fixed but always in motion, always pulled by currents larger than we are. And perhaps, if what lies beneath is restless, then so are we. The continents drift, carried quietly on a sea of stone. And above them, everything we see and know unfolds on a stage that is never still, which softly invites the question, as we gaze again toward their forgotten shapes. What happened to the lands that no longer exist, the supercontinents that once held all life and then vanished? What happened to the lands that no longer exist, the supercontinents that once held all life and then vanished? To picture them is to step quietly into a memory the Earth once held in full and has since allowed to dissolve. Pangaea, Gondwana, Rodinia, vast bodies of land stretching across half the globe, continents not as we know them now but as single immense shapes, mountain chains wrapped in endless deserts, coastlines stretching farther than the eye could imagine. They are not myths. They were real. They existed long enough for forests to rise and wither, for seas to fill with creatures who will never be named, for skies to carry climates different from anything we could recognize. And then they broke. They fragmented, piece by piece, undone not by catastrophe in a single moment but by steady motion, a patient unraveling across millions of years. If you close your eyes and let the thought drift, you might imagine standing in the center of Pangaea, perhaps 300 million years ago. The air would feel heavy, the seasons different from what you know. Great deserts stretched across its heart, vast plains of red dust under skies thick with strange winds. Life clung stubbornly at its edges. Swampy coasts where amphibians thrived, forests where insects grew larger than birds now. And beneath it all, the tectonic stage was already shifting, preparing the slow fracture that would undo everything. For a continent so vast, so seemingly eternal, the thought of its disappearance feels unthinkable. But nothing in geology is immune to time. Gondwana, older still, was a southern empire of land that once included what would become South America, Africa, India, Antarctica, and Australia. Imagine this great landmass covered with glaciers, forests, and enormous river systems that no longer exist. Its landscapes shaped patterns of ocean current. Its mountains changed the way air and rain moved across the world. Entire lineages of creatures evolved in its shade, creatures whose silence now fills the fossil record. And yet, Gondwana too fractured, scattered by the same mantle currents that guide all land. Today, its remnants float apart, wearing different names, different climates, as though the Earth herself dismantled and redistributed her memory. What does it mean when even something as immense as a supercontinent can vanish? The stone that once bound them still exists. It has merely been rearranged. South America may rest far from Africa now, but in stone they still carry complementary scars, coastlines that once fit like puzzle pieces, magnetic traces pointing back toward their shared history. It's as if the planet, even in its breaking, left faint signatures for us to notice later. Like someone folding a letter into pieces but leaving its faint ink visible if you press close enough. The land itself holds echoes of its former unity. And perhaps, if supercontinents can vanish, then permanence becomes nothing more than an illusion offered to comfort us. Mountains rise higher than anything we can fathom, then crumble into simple dust. Seas reach across half the world, then evaporate into deserts. Continents merge and part again in cycles repeating endlessly, and life adjusts with each new chapter, sometimes flourishing, sometimes ending. Extinction itself often followed these transformations. Shifts in land changed circulation in the oceans, altered oxygen levels, warmed and cooled the air in swings abrupt in geologic terms. Entire worlds of creatures disappeared, reabsorbed into the stone of memory. The Earth remembers them through fossils pressed into layers, through isotopes altered in ancient seas, through mineral veins that lock away the chemical whispers of vanished lives. But what if even fossils are selective stories? What if much has gone missing, eras ground away by erosion, oceans pulling secrets down into subduction zones where they are melted into mantle darkness? We like to think we know the shape of prehistory, the clean chains of continents and oceans, but vast chapters remain blank, stripped from the archive by entropy. Could entire civilizations, if they had ever been, be erased in that erasure? Not because there is no proof, but because geology itself does not permit everything to remain. 1 billion years is long enough to clear the page clean, long enough to forget without malice, to let even great landmasses dissolve into silence. And so, the vanished supercontinents do not speak loudly. They leave enough shimmer in magnetic fields, enough alignment in coastlines to whisper that they were real. They leave just enough traces buried in stones we can still touch. And maybe that is the nature of deep memory, not to cling to every detail, but to hold the faintest echoes so that those who come later can lean in and wonder. Maybe that is all the permanence we will ever know. And yet, if continents of such size and grandeur can rise and fall, if unity itself can be temporary, then what smaller fragments, dust, fossils, forgotten creatures, are lying hidden, carrying stories that have yet to be told? For sometimes, the truest memory is not left in stone cliffs or mountain ranges, but in the smallest of particles, drifting quietly through air, settling into layers, invisible yet indispensable. Dust, tiny grains that float across oceans, lifted from deserts, carried by winds as if the earth is exhaling pieces of herself into the sky. To us, dust seems like nothing, an irritation, something to be brushed away from shelves, wiped from skin. But to geology, dust is evidence. It is archive. It is the planet's subtle script written in mineral strokes so delicate that only isotopes can decipher them. Imagine a single grain of dust, no bigger than a speck caught in light. It may have broken free from the weathered surface of a mountain older than memory. It may have been born out of glacial grinding, a fragment of once towering stone ground into powder. Perhaps it lay quiet for centuries, buried beneath layers of soil, only to be swept loose by the faint persistence of wind. From there it drifts, across plains, across seas. It might land softly in a distant valley, in a river delta, in the open ocean, far from the place of its birth. We inhale it, we walk upon it, we wipe it from our windows each morning, and without knowing, we interact daily with pieces of vanished landscapes, mountains that no longer stand, seas that have long since retreated. Scientists study dust by tracing its isotopic fingerprints, ratios of elements that remember the unique conditions of the rock from which they spilled. Oxygen isotopes, strontium, lead, they carry coded histories of the climates they once endured, of the places they departed from, of the seas they briefly traveled above. Within these particles are time markers sharper than memory. They tell when a mountain first eroded. They whisper when a glacier advanced or pulled back. They record when deserts formed, vast and brutal, scattering their powder into the wind. And through them we glimpse ancient winds themselves, currents bending and shifting with shifting climates, long before we placed barometers or wrote records. Dust becomes the handwriting of the atmosphere, a diary scrawled across the sky. We may never fully grasp it, but every breath of air contains echoes of this journey. Somewhere in the air you breathe tonight, particles may still linger from the Sahara, from Andean ridges, from ice fields scoured 1,000 years ago. They are global travelers, drifters across epochs, linking places and eras that otherwise never meet. What could it mean, then, That so much of the Earth connects through something this small. Maybe memory doesn't require size. Maybe permanence is not measured in what towers, but in what persists quietly, scattered and unnoticed. And dust does not only tell the story of the land. It nourishes oceans, carrying iron that blooms into life across blue expanses. It feeds forests half a world away. It fosters cloud seeds, shaping weather, shaping rain. It moves invisibly, but with power enough to sustain everything we know. What we dismiss as residue is, in truth, circulation, preservation, evidence. Not because dust intends to hold memory, not because it carries design, but because nothing on this earth can move without leaving something behind. So perhaps we are left to wonder, what has dust already erased, and what has it preserved? Could there be clues within grains still waiting in ice cores, deep below polar silence, pressing against each other in a frozen record of unseen centuries? Could civilizations, ours or before, leave their faintest shadows carried on invisible winds, diluted but not completely erased, drifting until they are laid down in quiet layers of silt and snow? If so, the earth remembers not only in mountains and seas, but in whispers of powder across the air. And if even dust remembers, delicately, gently, without effort, then how many other silent testimonies are lying all around us, waiting to be read? The stories in dust lead us back toward the forces that shape where dust comes from, the breaking of continents, the fractures that open like long, patient wounds in stone. For when land itself begins to drift apart, the first movements are subtle, almost invisible. A crack deep in the crust, a widening valley formed by tension, and then, given time, water arrives. Oceans are opportunistic. They flow into absence, filling every empty space the planet creates. What began as a hidden line in rock grows into a rift, and the rift pulls wider, until seas spill in and reshape the world. Separation is not sudden. It is a meditation in slowness. Over millions of years, one continent becomes two, brushed apart like petals carried by a gentle current. Valleys stretch, rivers feed into deepening basins, and eventually saltwater follows. New coastlines appear, unmarked and raw, their shapes unfamiliar to everything that has come before. Imagine it, the first shoreline of a newborn sea. Waves rolling not against ancient cliffs or eroded sands, but meeting land that has just been exposed, fragile and sharp. Here, creation and collapse are inseparable. For the continent must itself break in order for new seas to live. Scientific traces of these separations are carved across the planet. Iceland today straddles the mid-Atlantic ridge, a living seam where the land is still parting, pulled centimeter by centimeter as ocean crust rises in between. Africa's Rift Valley, with its long lakes and fissures, is another beginning, a continent slowly unraveling into pieces, each destined to drift away. Even where we walk today, there are subtle reminders of this recurring rhythm. Sediment layers that remember the first floods, fossils of marine creatures found far inland where seas once occupied what is now dry plain. What if every coast we know, every bay and gulf and channel, carries the memory of fracture? Could it be that oceans themselves are archives, spreading between torn pieces of land, recording in coral and sand the story of separation and reunion? And if we return our attention to echoes of long prehistory, supercontinents give us the grandest examples. Pangaea split apart, not in a rush but in tender fractures that widened with the passing of epochs. From this slow break were born the Atlantic Ocean, the coastlines of Africa and South America, mirroring each other across a distance filled with salt, currents, storms, and stories. Their complementary edges reveal not randomness, but inevitability, the quiet logic of drift and divide. Oceans may disguise the break, yet on a map, the echoes are clear. The jigsaw of continents is perhaps the most visible memory the Earth offers us. But if seas are born from fractures, then oceans are also reminders of impermanence. Their shapes are temporary, their basins destined to widen, shrink, and one day vanish. Currents form, climates bend, species adapt and disperse. Entire ecosystems are written into being because two plates decided, with silent persistence, to let go of one another. Land gives way, separation creates possibility, and life flows into the spaces newly formed. What if, in some sense, every beginning requires a break? What if memory itself, like the continents, must fracture in order to move forward? Each ripple pressed into stone at the edge of a young ocean can still be found in sediments, hidden libraries where geologists read the first conversations between waves and land. The texture of sandstone records tides. The layering of evaporite minerals recalls seas that briefly flooded then retreated again. To look carefully at cliffs or cores is to notice the exact moment when water entered a world that had been all land, when silence gave way to rhythm, when stillness gave way to motion. Separation is not only collapse, but renewal. Perhaps it has always been so. And so, when we look at oceans today, endless, eternal seeming, it is worth remembering they too were born. They too are chapters begun in fractures, expanded through patience, and destined one day to close again. Nothing that appears boundless escapes the hands of deep time, which leaves us wondering, if oceans hold such power in their creation, what else do they take with them into their depths? What forgotten maps, what sunken shores, what memories washed away by waves? Some things are lost forever, carried off into trenches or erased by storms, but some are caught, preserved, pressed into stone as if time itself paused for a moment. Fossils. They are fragments of life fixed in silence, the closest thing the earth has to photographs. And yet they are not pictures. They do not show us life as it was, but life filtered through geology, transformed into rock. Fossilization is both miracle and accident, a rare negotiation between endurance and decay. And in those petrified impressions, we glimpse time frozen, however briefly, against the great drift of everything else. Imagine an ancient forest, stretching for miles along a humid floodplain 300 million years ago. Trees rise that no human eye has seen, their shapes both familiar and alien. Leaves shimmer in air dense with oxygen. Insects hum in sizes now impossible. And then, a flood sweeps across. Trees topple, sink into mud. Creatures are caught in silt. Usually, decay would claim everything. The tree rotting to soil, the insect vanishing into fragments of chitin, the creature dissolving into dust. But sometimes, conditions align just so. Sediment buries forms quicker than air can claim them. Minerals infiltrate tissues, replacing softness with stone. And in that unlikely moment, a memory is captured. No longer living, yet still present. No longer pulse or breath, yet not truly gone. A fossil is time hardened into detail. Veins of a leaf, ridges of a shell, the faint bones of a creature long dissolved into mystery. Science tells us this happens rarely. For every billion lives, perhaps only one is remembered this way. Most vanish without trace into the soil. But those few survivors become the storytellers of eras. Trilobites hidden in limestone reveal oceans that no longer exist. Ferns pressed like shadows into stone slabs whisper of once lush swamps turned to coal. The tooth of a great predator reveals more than its ferocity. It speaks of food chains, of waters filled with prey, of an ecosystem surrounding it in silence. Each fossil is evidence but also question. Because what of the billions that left no imprint? What of lives erased with nothing to say they had ever been? Could it be that even the memory of existence depends on coincidence? That survival in history requires not only living, but the chance of being caught, sealed, buried, spared by the Earth's ongoing erosion. And yet, fossils are not only bones or shadows. They extend into isotopes, into chemistry itself. Ancient seas preserve the ratios of oxygen isotopes in shells, locked within carbonate stone. From these silent markers, scientists read old climates like lines in a journal. Cold periods, warm intervals, sudden shifts. The shells do not speak aloud, but their substances whisper through data, revealing atmospheres and oceans as they once were. In amber, too, memory holds. Tiny insects caught mid-flight, air bubbles holding atmospheres we will never breathe again. To press one of those golden drops to the light is to gaze through windows into vanished skies. But what fascinates even more is how incomplete this memory remains. Entire forests once stretched across Antarctica when it was green and warm, and yet only spectral hints remain of those lost ecosystems. Dinosaurs ruled Earth for over 150 million years, and still the fossil record shows only fragments, as though an epic saga had been reduced to scattered shards of pottery. We piece together what we can, but silence outweighs what is revealed. What if life forms flourished that left no trace at all? What if species, maybe entire worlds of interaction, have been erased without hope of discovery? Could memory itself be less a library and more a scattering of forgotten pages? There is humility in realizing that fossils, as extraordinary as they are, only sharpen how much we do not know. They remind us that memory in stone works selectively, sometimes cruelly. We see only what chance allowed to survive. And beyond the fossil's presence lies absence. The unseen, the unrecorded, the erased by entropy and by time. Perhaps every fossil, no matter how detailed, is as much a monument to what isn't there as what is. Every imprint of a fern is also an echo of forests gone without trace. Every bone encased in shale is also the silence of countless creatures around it, erased forever. Still, when we run a hand across fossilized bark, when we look closely at skeletal outlines etched against rock, we encounter something almost uncanny. And memory has outlasted empires, outlasted mountains, outlasted entire climates. Fossils endure while continents drift above them, folded, eroded, yet somehow carried forward. They are time-hardened against loss. But even they, given enough eras, will vanish too. Plate subduction will carry them down into the mantle. Mountains bearing their treasures will erode. The archive itself will close. Not because the earth is cruel, but because permanence has never been part of this world. And yet, if fossilization can preserve even fleeting glimpses against billions of years, if the earth can hold a moment of life inside her restless crust, then what else might she be carrying, hidden deeper, waiting beneath? For as complete as a fossil may feel, as miraculous as it is that shells and bones become stone, there are times when the stone says almost nothing at all. Places where records thin, where layers of sediment grow strangely empty, where the memory of life seems to pause. These gaps are not always an accident. Sometimes they are the long silences of extinction. Extinctions mark the story of Earth as surely as its mountains and seas. 5 times, at least in the history we can trace, the great majority of life has collapsed. The Ordovician, the Devonian, the Permian, the Triassic, the Cretaceous, names that mean little outside geology, but which hold at their heart vast disappearances. The Permian extinction especially, sometimes called the Great Dying, wiped away nearly 90 of marine species, an erasure so complete it is difficult even to imagine what the seas must have looked like before. Fossils stop. Their endless repetition of shells and creatures abruptly vanishes, replaced by emptiness in layer after layer, as if the planet fell silent. What causes such silence? Often it is the continents themselves. As plates drifted, climates shifted. Supercontinents created deserts at their cores, starving ecosystems of rainfall. Volcanic eruptions unleashed into the air vast clouds of ash and greenhouse gases. Oceans stagnated, deprived of oxygen as currents collapsed, leaving water suffocating and still. Sometimes ice returned with a sudden harshness, spreading across land too quickly for forests to migrate. Other times heat rose unbearable, bleaching seas into dead zones. And through it all, life struggled, but much of it could not. Entropy claimed it, absorbed it, left behind only emptiness written into stone. There is something unnerving about these silences. Fossils usually flow like a conversation. Patterns of shells, subtle changes in species, gentle evolutions across time. But in extinction layers, the record breaks. Continuity gives way to absence. The page is blank. One moment, teeming variety. The next, a void. Could it be that the Earth also pauses to breathe? That extinction is less an end than a deep inhale we cannot yet understand? Or is it simply the law of entropy made vast? A reminder that even life on a planetary scale cannot escape impermanence. In a way, silence itself becomes the record. A lack of fossils says as much as their abundance. Chemistries in rock show spikes in carbon or sulfur isotopes, revealing collapses in atmosphere and ocean. Ash bands tell of explosive volcanism. Shifts in isotope ratios whisper of warming seas, anoxic depths, strange intrusions of gases like methane. It is a dark memory, yet precise, an accounting of conditions that crushed ecosystems one by one until the chorus of life became dim. And still, silence is never absolute. Even in extinction's shadow, a few survivors endure, carrying fragments of lost worlds forward. From the great dying emerged ammonites into the oceans again, reptiles upon the land, seeds waiting in embers of forests that regrew in altered skies. Extinction does not erase everything, though it almost seems to want to. Clears the stage, then leaves room for something unexpected. Some find in this repetition a strange philosophy, that life is not steady ascent but rhythm, loss and resurgence, fracture and flourish. Maybe the long silences are as necessary as the songs themselves. When we imagine extinction, we often see catastrophe. But the earth records it more gently, more slowly. Not a single night, but millions of years fading into absence. Species do not all vanish in the same instant. They ebb, they falter, they slip into memory. The silence grows gradually until it seems complete. Perhaps it is less an apocalypse and more a dimming of light, a world losing voices until only echoes remain. Is it possible that this cycle is not cruelty but simply the only way memory turns? Not because life fails, but because the earth continues to change, and change is remorseless in its patience. And so, as we lie awake thinking of fossils beneath us, we must also remember the spaces between them, the long pauses where nothing was recorded or nothing could be. A silence that belongs as much to Earth's memory as the imprints of shell and feather. And if silence can itself be a kind of evidence, then we are reminded that absence has weight, that the blank spaces of history press as firmly upon us as its preserved remains. And yet, if extinction can hollow out the record so completely, if memory itself can fracture into silence, then what of the fragments left behind, the isolated islands of living land adrift in the oceans of deep time? Islands are interruptions in the vastness, pieces of land separated not by intention, but by the slow drift of continents and the patient carving of seas. Today we see them as small worlds. Greenland floating like an immense stone raft in the north, Madagascar encircled by waves in the Indian Ocean, New Zealand lingering at the edge of tectonic seams. But each island carries a deeper story, for none of them began alone. They are not inventions of the ocean, but fragments of once immense landscapes, continental pages torn and scattered, still carrying sentences of the larger story from which they came. To imagine Greenland is to imagine a shard of an older whole, a remnant of North America and Europe parted by the opening of the Atlantic. Its ice sheets hide ancient bedrock, imprinted with the memory of a world long before humans, long before the cold that now defines it. Beneath the ice, stone remembers forests, rivers, climates that passed in quiet succession as the land drifted farther northward. Madagascar, too, is an island only in appearance. Once it clung to Africa and India, before slow tectonic pulling set it adrift. Its forests, filled with creatures found nowhere else, are not accidents of isolation but echoes of ancient lineages, carried like seeds upon the drift of continents. What does it mean, then, to be an island? Perhaps not isolation, but transformation. For in every break from a supercontinent, in every separation, the Earth creates laboratories of life. Species evolve along different paths. Climates nurture unfamiliar ecosystems. Madagascar is witness to that. Lemurs dancing in forests, baobab trees rising like guardians. New Zealand, once part of Gondwana, still carries the descendants of birds that flourished in a world unrecognizable to us. To call them islands is to speak only of geography. To call them memories of lands broken and scattered is perhaps closer to truth. But islands are not only fragments of what came before. Could they also be seeds of what is to come? If continents themselves drift and merge across billions of years, then perhaps an island is not just what remains, but what waits. In far futures, the fragments we know as separate might collide again, knitting together into new shapes, new supercontinents. Greenland may not always be a solitary mass of icy stone. Madagascar may one day be pressed against other shores as cycles of drift continue. The world is always rearranging itself. So perhaps every island is both memory and promise. A today that carries both the remnants of the past and the potential of tomorrow. Geologically, these mobile fragments remind us of the restlessness beneath the crust. Islands form where rifts tear apart plates, where mountain roots lose their grip, where volcanism builds upward from magma plumes. They do not simply appear, they are made. And once made, they drift. Gently, inexorably, they travel upon the mantle's slow current. To imagine islands moving is to imagine rafts in the ocean of stone. Yet rafts that need no wind, no sail, only the deep push of the earth itself. Centimeter by centimeter, they change their position, and with it the very fabric of Earth's climate and currents. Islands also preserve silences. Their smallness, their separation from continents, means species vanish here too, sometimes more quickly, sometimes remembered only in fossils buried beneath volcanic ground. Each extinction upon an island is both a loss of life today and the erasure of memory tomorrow. Could it be that the rarest stories of all belong to these small floating lands, because they hold both presence and absence in their fragile spaces? And in this, they remind us again that memory is scattered unevenly across the Earth's archives. So we ask, in soft tones, are islands fragments, mourning their separation from something larger? Or are they beginnings, germinating lives and futures that could not exist without the fracture? Maybe they are both. Maybe they are neither. Maybe an island is simply what happens when drift interrupts stillness, when seas widen into valleys, when a continent exhales a piece of itself. And so, the islands move still, quietly, restlessly on their currents of stone. And if fragments continue to wander like this, what echoes might linger in the very ground beneath them? The signals, the deep vibrations, the seismic whispers rising from the mantle itself? For beneath our feet, beneath the crust and even the roots of mountains, the earth speaks a language not of words but of waves. Seismic ripples travel through the planet each time the crust fractures, each time it sighs under pressure, each time a quake interrupts the stillness we imagine as permanent. Though we cannot hear them directly, these pulses resonate everywhere, carrying memories through rock, whispering conditions no eye can see. Seismology, at its heart, is a form of listening. Scientists place instruments into the ground, tuning them to catch the smallest tremors, and in those vibrations they read the interior as though the earth were singing from within. When an earthquake shakes the surface, its shock does not vanish. It travels inward, through stone, bending, slowing, refracting as it meets layers of different density. Some waves cannot pass through liquid, others fold around cores of iron and nickel, others scatter or vanish entirely. From this pattern of movement and absence, the planet's structure is revealed. Not in direct sight, but in the echo of soundless voices. It is difficult to imagine silence that contains so much. Yet that is what the mantle offers. A silence full of motion, a stillness full of resonance. Deep plumes rise, carrying heat upward like breath, even as ancient slabs of crust are swallowed downward through subduction zones, descending slowly into the unseen. These movements stir, and each stirring leaves trails in the seismic record. You and I may not hear it, but the earth is constantly vibrating, even when no quake disturbs us, a restless hum from friction, from tides, from winds passing over mountain ranges. Perhaps it is possible to think of this as the earth's memory in motion, the beating of a pulse that never sleeps. And there is wonder in asking what might be hidden in these vibrations. Could they carry faint signatures of vanished supercontinents, echoes of massive collisions long ago? The waves that travel deepest through Earth pass through matter that has not seen the surface for billions of years. In that matter, perhaps there are scars, irregularities formed when ancient plates plunged into mantle darkness, never to return. Seismic tomography, like an X-ray of the planet, reveals strange features far beneath, blobs of denser rock, fountains of heat, that suggest layered memories far older than life itself. Could it be that the mantle contains its own archives, not of creatures or forests, but of collisions and erasures, of the planet rewriting itself from below? Imagine pressing your ear to the earth and hearing only faint stillness, while deep underfoot enormous waves rumble past. They bend around the outer core, they stall in liquid, they accelerate through iron, but to us they are imperceptible. Planetary memory exists not only in fossils or coastlines or dust, but in these reverberations that never reach the air. To listen properly is to remember that silence is never true silence, that stillness is never unmoving. The planet is humming always, quietly, persistently, as if reciting something we cannot catch. And perhaps, in these seismic echoes, we can glimpse an idea of identity, an Earth defined not by surface appearances, but by hidden resonance. What would it mean to think of the planet itself as a musician, its mantle the instrument, its quakes the notes? Not music meant for the ear, but for stone, traveling endlessly through matter until it fades. Or perhaps the mantle is less performance than archive, a library where each wave leaves a trace, layering resonance upon resonance, a chorus of events stretching back to the dawn of tectonic motion. Maybe memory is not written only in what hardens into stone, but in what reverberates quietly beneath all stone. And yet, if the planet speaks most clearly in echoes we can barely detect, vibrations lost beneath our hearing, then what larger rhythms are shaping the surface without our awareness? For deep tremors within lead us outward to something we can see, something vast and slow that keeps time not with sound, but with silence and ice. Across millions of years, the Earth has breathed in cycles of cold, exhaling glaciers across continents and then drawing them back again. These are not accidents of weather or the passing of seasons, but rhythms guided by drifting land, tilting orbits, and shifting skies. Together, they create a calendar written not on paper or stone, but carved into valleys, pressed into shorelines, sculpted in frozen memory. A glacier begins humbly, with snow that does not melt. Layer upon layer, each season folded into the last, until the weight of snow becomes ice, solid, heavy, restless. Gravity takes hold, and the glacier begins to move, though so slowly we cannot see it. Over centuries, it creeps forward, grinding mountain flanks, reshaping valleys, carrying with it stones and silence. To witness its work in retrospect is to see the fingerprints of cold stamped on landscapes everywhere. Wide U-shaped valleys, erratic boulders stranded far from their source, polished rock that gleams like glass. Each is a mark of ice, reminders that the world we know has not always looked as it does now. And yet glaciers do more than carve, they record. In ice cores drilled from Greenland and Antarctica, scientists read the past as clearly as pages in a frozen book. Trapped bubbles of air reveal atmospheres from hundreds of thousands of years ago. Ratios of isotopes tell when it was colder, when it grew warmer, when carbon surged in the air, and when silence fell instead. To study these is to eavesdrop on a million frozen whispers. The planet's memory does not lie still. It is held in ice, waiting for us to lean closer. Glacial cycles are not random. They are guided by the tilt of Earth's axis, by the slow wobble of its orbit, by the drift of continents themselves. When land gathers around the poles, ice is more likely to grow, feeding itself with reflection, expanding across the surface. When continents scatter closer to the equator, ice retreats, shrinking into mountaintops, dissolving into seas. The position of land on the body of the planet plays its part, as if continents themselves are gears in a hidden clock, modulating when cold begins, when warmth takes hold. Could it be that Earth's heartbeat is not only in the mantle's tremors but also in these cycles of ice and thaw? And as glaciers advance and retreat, the planet breathes in patterns. Sea levels fall when water is bound in ice, and rise when thaw returns it to the oceans. Ecosystems vanish, then reappear. Forests contract toward the equator during ice ages, then expand outward like lungs filling again in warmth. Species drift with climate, changing paths of migration, leaving fossils in places now strange to us. The mammoth grazing in Siberia, the lion stalking European plains, both made possible by pulses of cold. And through it all, continents continue their slow drift, not hurried by ice, but subtly guiding its path. Perhaps we can think of glacial cycles as punctuation in Earth's story, pauses, breaths, commas in the flow of deep time. Each pause marks both loss and renewal. Extinctions accompanied these cycles, as climates shifted more quickly than species could keep pace. And yet new adaptations followed, shaping forms that seemed inevitable only after the fact. Maybe the rhythm of ice is a reminder that change is the only certainty, that what feels like stillness is always movement on a larger scale. For us, living now in what geologists call an interglacial, the warmth of this moment is not permanent. Already the Earth holds memory of colder rhythms. Already the archives of ice remind us what has been before and could come again. The glaciers that remain on Greenland and Antarctica are not relics of another age, but participants in this ongoing breathing, waiting with vast patience for the next tilt, the next drift, the next return of cold. If we look at the Earth this way, the planet's true calendar is not years, not centuries, but ice itself. Frozen timekeepers marking eras, counting shifts, holding futures as well as pasts. What we call history is but a flicker compared to their scale. The ice waits, the ice records, the ice advances, the ice retreats. It never hurries. It never forgets. Perhaps in that, we glimpse the planet's own sense of continuity. And yet, if ice can sculpt the land and measure time so faithfully, then what does the sea remember? In the darkness beneath its waves, where drowned landscapes and forgotten coastlines still rest unseen. For if glaciers are a kind of calendar, then oceans are their cartographers, keeping maps written not in ink or paper, but in depth and contour. Beneath the surface of every sea lies another Earth, one hidden from us, one quieter, one less familiar. To look upon a bathymetric chart, tracing the seafloor in blues and gradients, is to glimpse a planet known in outline yet never fully revealed. Submerged ridges stretch like mountain ranges drowned, trenches plunge deeper than Everest rises, valleys vanish beneath miles of salt water. These are the secret borders we do not see, the maps that continents left behind as they drifted apart. Each coastline marks not a boundary but an invitation to wonder, for where land now ends, it once extended farther. Glacial cycles pulled seas downward, exposing wide plains now invisible. In the last ice age, much of the world's oceans were locked into frozen sheets, and so coastlines stretched outward, linking islands, forming bridges, exposing shelves that are today submerged. Human beings once walked upon those drowned landscapes, crossing dry corridors where now only fish can swim. The Bering Land Bridge that joins Siberia and Alaska is gone, resting beneath the shallows. Sundaland, once an extension of Southeast Asia, lies hidden beneath Indonesian seas. To walk upon beaches now lost to the water was once to stand on continents larger and more connected. Today, all that remains of those worlds are faint outlines, read by sonar and satellite, faint shadows beneath waves. Bathymetry, the study of ocean depths, has become a kind of archaeology of absence. Sonar maps return images of cliffs, ridges, plateaus, ghost continents whose coastlines lie below the tide, unseen but not forgotten. In these drowned shapes are the remnants of Pangaea's fracture, the debris of Gondwana's parting, the scars of rifts still birthing new oceans today. Each ridge beneath the Atlantic holds memory of widening seas. Each trench in the Pacific marks places where plates are diving back into mantle oblivion. The surface map of Earth is incomplete without these, for half the story of the continents lies beneath saltwater silence. And yet the sea does not only erase, it preserves, too. Sediments collect upon these hidden landscapes, layering memory grain by grain. Fossils of marine creatures thrive there, telling stories of oceans long before ours. Isotopic trails fix temperatures into shells, recording climates we will never feel. Even the drowned shorelines themselves preserve imprints. Ancient coral reefs that now lie too deep for wave or sunlight, carved terraces left by the rise and fall of seas like rings of a drowned tree. Each one speaks of a time when the ocean pulsed higher or lower, marking each advance and retreat, each inhale and exhale of Earth's water. And perhaps this is what makes the ocean so haunting. It is both the keeper and the thief of history. It erases coasts, swallowing ports and plains until memory itself is difficult to recover. But it also cradles those erasures gently, preserving them beneath layers of sediment and cold. Could it be that the sea is the planet's most enigmatic archive, hiding its libraries not above but below, storing what it has taken in silence? Maybe lost civilizations, if they ever existed, are not buried under deserts but beneath these shelves. Maybe their remnants are carried in drowned valleys, beneath waves too deep for sunlight, where they wait in patience far longer than we can imagine. Our maps have always been incomplete. For most of history, humans traced shorelines only on the surface, never realizing the continents stretched farther beneath. Even now, our bathymetric charts are not complete, their details arriving only in fragments, sonar beams illuminating small slices while vast regions remain vague. It is as if the Earth insists on retaining some of her secrets, holding them in suspension under swells too deep for us to reach. And when we think on this, another question rises quietly. Do we map the ocean to discover new places, or to remember the ones already lost? To stand beside the sea at twilight is to sense this hidden geography pressing outward, though unseen. Every tide laps against the edge of forgotten lands. Every horizon conceals continents drowned by time. Perhaps that is why the ocean feels so vast, because beneath its surface lie not only depths, but centuries, coasts, worlds erased from view. And if the sea keeps these maps folded in silence, then we are like wanderers standing beside a locked library, hearing only the faintest whispers through the walls. And yet, if the oceans themselves hold so much memory in their depths, if forgotten maps rest beneath waves beyond our sight, then what of the land above, the living crust itself, breathing, breaking, exhaling ancient gases into our present skies like the slow breath of time? When we think of breath, we imagine lungs or wind moving through trees, but the planet's own breath is older, deeper, slower. It rises not in seconds, but in millions of years. Volcanoes are its exhalations. They loom against horizons, often still, often patient, but within them lies the memory of buried oceans, compressed forests, subducted crust. What they release is more than fire. It is carbon, oxygen, and water carried back into the air, matter once locked away now given voice again. A volcanic eruption is dramatic when seen in the moment, but to the Earth it is only the surface of something continuous. Beneath, recycling never ceases. Ocean plates sink in subduction zones, carrying with them sediments filled with shells, coral, the skeletal remains of lost life. These descend into darkness, melted, reformed, then vented back upward as gas, as lava, as ash. The air we breathe was shaped by these cycles. Oxygen kindled by life, balanced by carbon returned through stone's decay. In this way, geology and climate are never separate. One exhales, the other inhales. The balance is imperfect, yet enduring, like the steady rhythm of a sleeper's chest. Each exhalation from the deep is also an opening in memory. Isotopes in volcanic gases allow us to trace time across unimaginable scales, revealing the fingerprints of earlier cycles of warming and cooling. Ancient eruptions left their mark in ice cores thousands of miles away, their fine ash a dark page in layers of snow. Coral reefs record the chemistry of atmospheres altered by fire long since extinguished. Even soil and peat hold traces of volcanic breaths, caught and preserved like whispers drifting through time. What if every breath of the planet leaves some small remnant, no matter how faint, waiting for us to notice? Perhaps nothing is truly lost, only circulated in patterns we do not yet fully hear. There is humility in realizing that our own cycles of breath are so fast, so fragile compared to the planet's. We breathe in moments, the earth in epochs. We fear the eruption, the instant of fire, but the earth regards it as part of her slow exhalation, no more unusual than our own sigh. Could it be, then, that when we stand before a volcano, what we are sensing is not fury, but respiration? Not destruction, but renewal? Not because the planet intends anything by it, but because matter returns always to air, to ocean, to stone again. When we see the sky streaked with volcanic ash, when we watch sulfur and carbon change the balance of air, when warmth or chill lingers after great eruptions, we are reminded that climate itself responds to the rhythms of stone. The great freezes of the past, the unexpected warmings, may owe as much to these breaths of Earth as to the drifting of continents or the tilt of orbits. The atmosphere is not detached. It is an organ tuned to geology, resonating with each exhalation across time. And what if our own sense of time is too narrow to hear the full cycle? We hear only the suddenness of eruption, never the patience of the lull. Not all exhalations are loud. There are the quiet vents on the ocean floor, black smokers sending plumes of minerals and gases into the abyss, unnoticed, yet feeding entire ecosystems born without sunlight. They remind us that not every breath stirs the sky. Some remain hidden, some speak only to the sea. And maybe it is fitting that the Earth keeps most of its breathing subtle, almost invisible, leaving us only occasional eruptions as reminders, visible punctuation in a sentence we rarely read. And yet, if the land itself breathes, if gases rise from stone carrying memories of oceans and forests long forgotten, then perhaps the fractures that cover its surface, fault lines stretching like scars across continents, are also voices, quiet records of the planet's hidden stresses, waiting to be listened to. Faults are lines drawn not by hands but by pressure, stretched and torn into rock by the weight of time itself. They are breaks but also records of motion. At first glance, they resemble wounds, gashes across the land, reminders of rupture. And yet, when we look closer, they are not simply signs of damage. They are writings of stress, inscribed into solid matter. They are memory lines. Imagine stone under slow tension, pulled across ages wider than memory. Year after year, the crust bends and adjusts, as imperceptible as breath. Then comes the release, the sudden slip, a quake trembling outward like the crack of unfurling silence. We call it destruction, but the Earth calls it recalibration. Stress written and rewritten again and again. Each movement of rock leaves its mark. Layers once aligned are offset. Valleys sink, ridges rise. The land does not return to what it was before. It carries evidence of the break, like a scar remembered on flesh. Maybe fault lines are the Earth's own diary, though one she does not intend to keep. To scientists, these lines are archives of motion. Along the San Andreas, we read how North America and the Pacific Plate have slid past one another for millions of years, carrying mountains and valleys along like luggage. In Asia, the Himalayas rise because of faulting, stone shoved upward inch by inch, a constant friction righting mountains against the sky. Beneath oceans, hidden faults open at spreading ridges, birthing crust and fire and pulling continents apart. And wherever subduction swallows land into the mantle, the fault becomes a threshold, the place where one chapter of Earth is erased, recast, and written again below. But what if faults are more than structural? Could they also be metaphors of identity? Reminders that even what seems unbroken carries hidden fractures within? If the strongest stone splinters under long enough strain, then perhaps we too are landscapes of stress and memory, changed invisibly until suddenly we shift. A person, like land, endures pressures slow and unseen, until they release, and something within them rearranges. Life continues, but differently, forever marked by the shift. Not broken, but shaped. Not erasure, but evidence. Could it be that the planet and we share this truth, that even scars are records of survival, not defeat? Faults also whisper how change often arrives quietly before it declares itself. Long before a quake, minerals inside rock deform. Atomic structures bend and scatter, releasing subtle precursors. Small tremors, chemical signals. Beneath the fault stillness is an accumulation of stress, a tension building with patience. That waiting, that heavy silence, is as much a part of the memory as the final release. The fault is history unfolding at two tempos, the slowness of stress building and the suddenness of its release. Together, they form a dual rhythm, one we cannot always predict, yet one carved faithfully into stone. Perhaps memory itself works this way, invisible pressures accumulating until they fracture through us, changing what we are in an instant. Walking along a fault is to walk on a story written through force. You can see cliffs where ground dropped suddenly, walls where rocks slid away, riverbeds displaced, their course adjusted forever. Yet the landscape does not lament these changes. Plants root in fractures, rivers adapt, soil fills the cracks. Life flows through scars without hesitation. Maybe there is wisdom in this. The recognition that every fault contains not only the past of rupture, but also the seeds of future growth. And when we ask the old questions, what if the earth remembers? What if stone records lives and silences? Faults offer their answer in quiet humility. They show us that memory is not always neat. It is offset, disjointed, fragmented, fractured. Continuity can break, but breakage itself becomes continuity. In the jagged lines of faults, the planet reveals that scars are not losses of self, but deeper forms of inscription. Is it possible, then, that the Earth's fractures carry more than geologic stress? Could they be the planet's closest thing to autobiography, written not because it meant to write, but because memory insists on being recorded wherever pressure and time exist? Like us, the Earth bears marks it cannot erase, lines etched across its body reminding us not only of vulnerability, but of endurance. And yet, if the Earth's fractures are texts written across stone, filled with pressure and release, then what of the rivers that sometimes resist these movements, carving their paths stubbornly through mountains and scars, outlasting the very structures that try to contain them? Rivers are among the most patient of Earth's archivists. They are motion embodied, yet they endure by flowing, cutting, persisting. While mountains are born through collisions and faults, rising like surges out of stone, rivers often predate them. A stream can begin its work across a flat plain, meandering aimlessly across soft soils, and when time raises a mountain in its path, the river does not step aside. It digs, continuously, endlessly. It carves downward as rock rises upward. The mountain grows, but the river grows deeper. To walk through a canyon carved this way is to slip into conversation with deep time. You see walls of strata towering above, each layer a chapter written countless ages before. Seas that have vanished, forests that turned to coal, deserts that hardened into sandstone, all preserved because the river cut downward, exposing them like pages peeled back one by one. The paradox is startling. Mountains are symbols of permanence, yet rivers often prove more enduring. The slow persistence of water can outlast whole ranges, leaving gorges where stone should have resisted. What if endurance is not measured in height or force, but in persistence so soft it seems fragile? Could it be that memory flows even more reliably than it stands? Geologists call these rivers antecedent or superposed, currents older than the topography they carve. The Indus, the Sutlej, the Yarlung Tsongpa in the Himalayas, names less familiar than the mountains themselves, but each one proof that rivers can resist being redirected. These waters existed before the rise of the Himalayas, and when the collision of India and Asia thrust rocks skyward, the rivers simply cut through, carving immense gorges deeper than Everest is tall. Around the world, similar stories persist. The Colorado cutting through the Colorado Plateau, the Yangtze slicing its way through gorges of stone, the Rhine meandering through rift valleys. Everywhere, rivers teach the same lesson, that flow is a kind of defiance, and motion itself can endure longer than stone. There is wonder in the quiet refusal of rivers to surrender their course. A fracture of the earth raises obstacles, yet the river holds memory of its path. It is not strength that sustains it, but relentlessness, the unhurried abrasion of sediment carried grain by grain. Water, though soft, writes its permanence into stone. We might ask, what if we too hold persistence written inside us? Not in loud declarations, but in steady movement, in the refusal to retreat even as the world shifts around us. Rivers endure not by resisting change, but by embodying it, carving through challenge until mountain and gorge become their testimony. Rivers also carry memory outward, lifting sediments from mountains, depositing them in plains and seas, scattering stone into future fossils, future cliffs. In this way, they dissolve the permanence of peaks into the fertility of valleys, transforming hardness into soil. Mountains feed the rivers, but rivers remember differently, distributing fragments into the next stage of Earth's story. Even within their flow, isotopes drift, chemical signals of glacial melt, volcanic dust, atmospheric changes filtered through watersheds. To study river sediments is to glimpse entire histories hidden in mud, an archive that never ceases to be written even as it is carried away. Perhaps the lesson is this: mountains rise but rivers remember. Mountains embody force, but rivers embody time. Is it possible that what outlasts most in this world is not what resists, but what moves with patience, what chooses continuity even when interrupted? Maybe rivers remind us that impermanence is not weakness, but the truest form of endurance. That what flows can last longer than what tries to hold still. And yet, if rivers can outlast the very mountains that attempted to block their paths, then what of us, what records, what sediments of civilization, might linger as technofossils long after cities have eroded away? For while rivers carve memories into valleys and fossils carry whispers of vanished lives, we too are leaving traces, though not in the same ancient ways. Our memory of existence may not be written in bone or leaf, but in substances we've made ourselves. Plastic beads, glass shards, bronze alloys, concrete foundations sunk into stone. What if these, rather than our stories or monuments, will be the true record of the age we call human? Geologists already have a word for it: technofossils. Remnants of technology that may far outlive us, scattered across sediments and sunk into layers. A plastic bottle fallen into the sea, drifting, breaking into fragments, sinking into silt, may survive longer than the civilization that birthed it. Layers of concrete highways, steel beams, crumbled buildings will eventually erode and weather, yet parts will fossilize, chemically distinct, unmistakably unnatural. Mixed into the archive of the planet, they will one day be studied like ammonites or trilobites, markers of a world that shifted into something entirely new. Could it be, then, that our most lasting legacy will not be art or language or philosophy, but the layer of waste we pressed into Earth? Imagine millions of years ahead, a geologist, not human, perhaps not even earthly, splits a slab of stone to reveal a circuit board pressed flat, its copper traces fossilized beside shells. A core sample might show a dark, irregular band composed of microplastics mixed with pollen and dust. To them, it may look as alien as the faint ripple of a Cambrian trilobite footprint looks to us. Evidence of a presence, undeniable, and yet so incomplete, so difficult to interpret. Would they know us through these traces? Or only guess that some thinking being once shifted the chemistry of oceans, buried cities beneath concrete, and seeded the air with signals now silent? And yet, our technofossils do not exist only in fragments of trash. They are also written in isotopes. Nuclear tests of the 20th century scattered radioactive elements across the globe, a fingerprint so distinct that future ages will easily identify the mid-1900s by its glow in sediments. Carbon released from burning ancient forests and coal lies trapped in the atmosphere, ice, and soil. These are trails of our presence, written across the entire planet, not locally but globally. Unlike the footprint of one species upon a riverbank, our imprint is planetary in scope. We did not intend it so, yet it has become so. Could it be that, in this way, the Earth is already storing our memory against its shifting crust? And still, entropy reminds us that nothing will remain unchanged. By any artifact time enough, and erosion will blunt its edges, chemical decay will alter its form, tectonics will bend it into new structure. Plates shift, oceans rise and fall, cities crumble faster than bone. What survives in the end may be only faint residues, microtextures preserved between grains of quartz, molecules resistant enough to rest within the soil for eons. Perhaps all our steel and circuits dissolve into dust, and yet even dust resists erasure when buried deep. Maybe it is inevitable that what remains of us will be both everywhere and nowhere, traces impossible to ignore, but insufficient to explain. There is wonder in realizing how humble our permanence might be. The statues we carved, the towers we raised, the satellites circling the skies all seem monumental now, but measured against deep time, they are fragile. A city may erode in centuries, a satellite may shatter in decades, yet the plastic bead drifting into silt may last 10 million years. Our children's toys, bright, disposable, may one day be the longest echoes of our kind. Perhaps permanence has always been a trick of perspective, not because the earth seeks to erase us, but because change is its language, and nothing escapes its grammar. What if other civilizations, if they existed before us, left their own technofossils and we have already passed them by? Entire continents subducted, their layers erased, their evidence folded and dissolved into mantle dark. Fossilization hides more than it reveals. Could we already be walking upon the ground where some other world's traces were scattered, simply unrecognizable, interpreted as minerals, misread as coincidence? Maybe what defines a civilization in deep time is not how loudly it rises, but whether it leaves a trace stubborn enough to outlast erosion. Still, we can imagine far ahead, as continents drift slowly into new configurations. Mountains will rise and glaciers will advance. Seas will pulse inward and outward. Yet within their sediments, a thin dark line will mark our presence. A stratum people far in the future or beings beyond people might notice. Here, they will say, something unusual occurred. A sudden spike in carbon. A rain of plastics. A layer of technologies no other epoch shows. It may be unreadable. It may be misinterpreted. But it will exist. We are already written into Earth's library, whether we like it or not. And so, when we think of memory, perhaps we need not imagine that it will be our words or stories that endure. Instead, it might be the quietest, strangest fragments, what we discard, what we never meant to preserve, that hold our true record. And if the Earth carries those records forward as her crust drifts, as the continents fold and fracture, then we too will drift with stone, layered into the fabric of deep time. And yet, if even our shadows will be pressed into stone, if technofossils will carry our unsettling memory into futures unimaginable, then what of the landscapes themselves? How entropy drags mountains down, how plains vanish, how silence remakes even monuments of rock into dust. For nothing we see upon the earth is fixed. No mountain lasts. No plain remains flat. Entropy is the patient sculptor, the one force that erases while shaping, dissolves while creating, carrying all things forward into forms we cannot predict. Consider a mountain newly raised, its peaks sharp, its angles unsoftened. In time, water begins to fall upon it, carving rivulets into canyons. Frost wedges into cracks. Winds polish its edges. Each storm, each season, is a subtle chisel, and over millions of years, what began as piercing summits slowly rounds into softer ridges. Even the mightiest Himalayas, still rising, are being worn at their crowns by entropy's insistence. No height is immune. The larger the mountain, the more it attracts erosion, the more gravity pulls its fragments downward, the more rivers scatter its pieces into plains. Like memory itself, grandeur is temporary. What looks indestructible in the moment is already dissolving into its next form. Entropy does not care for scale. It is at work in the smallest pebble as surely as in entire continents. Beaches rise and fall as grains are pulled away by tides. Cliffs collapse grain by grain into the surf, then settle as sandbars somewhere else. Even plains, which might seem steady, slowly tilt and buckle, warped by the restless currents of the mantle below. Nothing is flat forever. Nothing is sharp forever. Nothing resists transformation forever. To think of the earth this way is to understand that permanence is an illusion. All shapes are temporary disguises of matter, borrowed costumes worn for one brief chapter of deep time. When we look at deserts, we might pause to consider the mountains they once had been. When we see river deltas spreading across the sea, we are seeing mountains carried away, dissolved into soils and silts. Even our continents, vast as they appear, are not immune. Their coasts will continue to erode, their interiors to shift, their mass to migrate wherever entropy pushes them. Memory is not preserved in the rocks by resisting decay. It is preserved through decay, through the constant recreation of landscapes, through the scattering of fragments that carry evidence onward. And what does this say about us? If no mountain endures, how can we imagine that our walls or cities, our borders or maps, could last unchanged? The entropy that wears cliffs into sand also crumbles towers. The same rain that dissolves granite will in time erase our carved names from stone. Is it possible, then, that forgetting is not the tragedy we imagine, but simply the continuation of Earth's rhythm? Memory may only ever exist in fragments, carried like sediment forward, repurposed elsewhere, transformed into something unrecognizable. Perhaps forgetting and remembering are not opposites, but partners in the same quiet cycle. There is humility in such a vision, to know that the Alps will one day collapse, that the Grand Canyon will one day fill, that deserts will shift where oceans now lie. And yet, there is also strange comfort. Entropy is not only loss, it is creation. The dust of one mountain becomes the soil of another valley. The sediment of plains becomes the stone of future cliffs. What collapses becomes the foundation for what is yet to rise. Maybe the planet whispers this is what memory actually is. Not a photograph fixed forever, but a story rewritten endlessly, each word dissolving into the next, none ever truly permanent, all of them necessary to the whole. We are reminded then that landscapes, like thoughts, change even as we witness them. Entropy assures the Earth does not cling to a single version of itself. Instead, it drifts, remakes, reimagines, always shifting into something new. Maybe permanence is not the lesson. Maybe transformation is. Maybe the landscapes we love are not meant to remain as they are, but to teach us that nothing is ever lost, only carried forward, fragile, into another shape. And yet, if every landscape is destined to shift, if entropy carries mountains and plains alike into disappearance, then what of the planet's attempt to speak? Its layered chapters encoded in stone? Can even memory itself survive within erasure? Perhaps, in some ways, the Earth has always been telling us a story, not with words or symbols of our own making, but with strata, with isotopes, with magnetic whispers pressed into the crust. If we learn to read them slowly, attentively, without haste, the continents begin to speak. Not in sentences we can quote, but in rhythms and sequences, like chapters written in patient stone. Each layer in the Earth is a page. Sediment settles in water, pressed down with the weight of time, hardened into lithic archives. Volcanic ash falls and solidifies, marking an event more abrupt, like punctuation. Rivers leave deltas of silt, glaciers scatter tills and boulders. Each line of text harder to read the deeper it is buried, yet still present, still waiting. These strata become the memory bank of the Earth, an unintentional book with no author but physics and time. Scientists, like careful listeners, lean into these layers with drills and cores, translating events hidden for millions of years. A spike of iridium here becomes evidence of an asteroid impact. A sudden shift in carbon isotopes becomes the shadow of ancient climate change. A band of reversed magnetism within basalt records the invisible flips of the Earth's magnetic field. Threaded together, they form not myth, not invention, but the most enduring story we have ever known. And this story is not fixed. It expands as we learn more of its language. Magnetic signatures sweep across seafloors, showing us how oceans have opened, how plates have drifted, how continents have wandered. Fossil pollen trapped in layers tells us what forests lived and died in climates long gone. Ice cores extend the book further, stretching chapters into atmospheres we will never breathe again. Is it possible that when we lean into this kind of reading, we are closer to listening than to studying? Not extracting truth as much as sitting quietly, allowing the planet's voice to rise through silence. The Earth speaks slowly, but it does speak. There is a strangeness in realizing that even reversal, decay, and absence become part of the storyline. A missing layer may signal erosion, as if a chapter was torn out. A gap itself becomes narrative, a silence with weight. Entropy writes into the text as much as deposition, for both presence and absence convey meaning. Could it be that what the Earth tells us is not only what has endured, but also everything that has been lost along the way? Not because it chooses, but because memory is always uneven, fragmentary, shaped by what remains and what vanishes. If we allow ourselves to think of the Earth as a storyteller, it is unlike any storyteller we know. It is not conscious, yet it conveys. It has no theme, yet its shifting layers reveal continuity. It does not intend to tell us about the Permian extinction or the rise of Pangaea or the deep warmth of Eocene forests, but it does so anyway. The story is a byproduct of time's passage, written into minerals, frozen into ice, sealed into the texture of clay. Perhaps this is the lesson: the planet does not speak in intention, but in consequence. It remembers by recording without choosing what it holds. And perhaps what is most haunting is how quietly intimate this storytelling is. When we stand among cliffs streaked with visible strata, when we see bands of red sandstone, gray shale, white limestone layered like delicate pages, we are standing before a literal cross-section of time. Each color is an atmosphere once lived, each fossil a character within the unfolding story. But no chapter stands alone. A cliff face is both story and silence, an unbroken continuity riddled with gaps. To gaze upon it is to know we are being invited into an account so large we cannot fully carry it. Yet still we try. Because maybe listening to the Earth's story is less about comprehension and more about surrender, to silence, to patience, to immensity. It is worth imagining how small we are within this layered telling. Our own record, though global in scale, will be one line among many, thin, dark, cluttered with plastics and isotopes, easier to miss than we imagine. We are entering the planet's library late, standing in the archive of billions of years where countless civilizations of stone, mountains, forests, oceans have had their say. We will add our sentence, perhaps even our footnote, but the book will continue without us. Does that diminish us, or does it place us within something far greater? Perhaps both. And maybe it does not matter if the Earth intends to tell a story. What matters is that the archive exists, that the record continues, that memory persists in matter even as lives and epochs dissolve. Silence does not prevent meaning, it creates the space where we can perceive it. Entropy does not erase narrative. It reshapes it into new patterns, new forms. The Earth, without ever intending to, tells us the story of itself through us. And yet, if the Earth can be read like this, if even stone can be treated as story, then what further chapters lie ahead, when entire continents converge into one again, and the horizon itself reshapes into a new stage for life? Deep time does not end here with us. It continues outward, a billion-year horizon of futures that we can barely trace, yet geologists attempt to glimpse. Their maps do not chart what is, but what will be, drifting possibilities stretched over epochs. And in those long projections lies the vision of a continent that has not yet been born. A future land already named Pangaea. Pangaea is imagined as a supercontinent rising far ahead, perhaps 200 to 300 million years from now, when the dance of plates pulls North America and Asia together. The Arctic will close, oceans will shrink, and fragments of smaller continents will be drawn into the merging mass. Eventually, Africa and Europe too may join, until what was once many scattered pieces reforms as one. But this is not the first time, nor the second. It is the rhythm of an endless loop. Pangaea before it, Rodinia before that, Nuna even farther back. Once every half-billion years or so, the planet draws its land together into one vast embrace, only to pull it apart again. Maybe this is not an anomaly. Maybe this is the Earth's breathing, each supercontinent a long inhale, each fracture a slow exhale. It is almost impossible to imagine living on Pangaea. The climate would be utterly strange. At the heart of such a landmass lies isolation. Far from oceans, the core grows dry, arid, desert-bound. Life would cling to its margins, near coasts and shallow seas. Wind and rain would shift their patterns, desert storms wandering across dry interiors, while ice might grow thick along the coasts if continents pressed toward the poles. Existing ecosystems would not survive such rearrangement. Species would vanish. New ones would emerge. The clock of evolution would strike again, beginning rhythms unfamiliar to us. If life persists that far ahead, it will grow on a planet utterly rescripted. Could it even recognize the world we know? But perhaps the more haunting thought is not what will be created, but what will be erased along the way. Our cities, if any ruins remain, will vanish into whatever seas reclaim them long before Amasia forms. Coasts will drown. Mountains will wear away. Entire regions familiar to us will fold beneath subduction zones, drawn down into mantle silence, their evidence recycled into magma. Will any memory remain of oceans like the Atlantic, of continents as we name them now? Or will even these maps of ours be as lost to that future as Rodinia is to us? Not because the Earth does not remember, but because time insists on rewriting its story in endless loops. When geologists model Amasia, they do so not with certainty but with patience, tracing the motions of plates measured today, then extending them outward. Centimeters per year add up when multiplied by millions, turning drift into distances greater than oceans. Magnetic stripes along the seafloor, isotopic trails within basalt, the whispers of seismic waves beneath crust, all are fragments of evidence feeding into these futures. And so, though we cannot see Amasia, its outline already shimmers in inference, as though waiting in the silence ahead. Is this prediction itself a kind of memory in reverse, science giving shape to something the Earth has not yet revealed? To lay beneath a night sky and think of two continents colliding millions of years hence is to feel scale unspool within us. We live too quickly for such cycles, our lifespans like sparks compared to the glacial patience of geological drift. And yet, to know that the Earth is still in motion, that it always has been and always will be, brings its own form of calm. There is reassurance in continuity, even if continuity is constant change. Perhaps this is the deeper wisdom of contemplating Amasia. Not its shape or climate, but its inevitability. The loop never ends. If the Earth holds memory in stone, then a supercontinent is its chorus, a refrain repeated through every age. Each time is unique, yet each follows a familiar arc. Land gathers. Land breaks, oceans close, oceans open, the stage resets, actors vanish, new ones evolve. The story rewinds without ever repeating exactly. What if this is the Earth's meaning of eternity? Not stasis, not permanence, but ceaseless cycles. Maybe eternity is not the absence of change, but the certainty of it. And still, questions persist. Will Amasia be the last of the supercontinents, or simply another in the sequence? Is there an end to the cycle, or will this loop continue until the sun itself expands, swallowing Earth into silence? Could it be that the planet's memory is infinite, rewriting endlessly, always dissolving the lines of the past in order to sketch the outlines of a new horizon? We cannot know, but perhaps we do not have to. Perhaps what matters is the recognition that the Earth is not still, that its story is not settled, that creation is always coming, even as memory is always fading. And when we imagine Amasia, what we are seeing is not only Earth's future, but also its past reflected back to us. It reminds us we are temporary settlers on a stage that will not remain. What seems permanent is only transition. What seems final is only a middle chapter. And this knowledge, quiet, almost tender, is enough to remind us how small, yet how connected we are to deep time. And yet, if the horizon of 1 billion years is already written into drift and collision, then what of our own place within that scale? What meaning remains when we set our fleeting civilizations against the backdrop of deep time itself? We walk among cities, towers, lights blooming at night across continents, and it feels permanent, as though stone and steel could secure our authority over time. But permanence belongs to geology, not to us. Against the slow drift of continents, the rise and fall of mountain chains, the opening and closing of oceans, our monuments are as fragile as chalk upon tide-washed stone. Consider the skyscraper, rising hundreds of meters, a daring geometry of glass and steel. From our perspective it is grand, resistant, eternal seeming. Yet geologically it is less than a flicker. In centuries it rusts and falls. In millennia it is rubble buried beneath soil, indistinguishable from rock fragments. In 1 million years it may be pressed, dissolved, eroded beyond recognition. Even the pyramids of Egypt, some of humanity's longest-standing constructions, have barely begun their journey into erosion compared to the cliffs and canyons that outlast them. Against deep time, even our boldest aspirations are as brief as footprints in sand. Our maps, too, are fragile illusions. Lines drawn upon continents convince us of permanence, borders, nations, ownership. Yet the land we claim shifts beneath even as we inscribe it, plates inching toward future horizons, seas creeping higher or lower with each pulse of ice. Could it be that our belief in permanence is a shared hypnosis, a comfort against the scale of time that dwarfs us? Perhaps our cities are not monuments to defiance, but to fragility, flares against the vast dark, marking only our moment of presence. And yet, traces will endure, though not as we imagine. Concrete may persist in fragments, remineralizing into new kinds of limestone. Ceramic shards, resistant to erosion, may travel with sediments into the layers of future rock. Plastics harden into technofossils, colorful remnants scattered inside cliffs unborn. The story of civilization will not be gone, but it will be altered beyond our recognition. Much of what we consider important, words, memory, voices, cultures, will not last. What will remain is residue, material testimony, matter uncaring of the meaning we assigned it. Perhaps it has always been this way. Fossils of ancient life show us outlines but never thoughts, bones but not feelings. Maybe we too will be remembered only through fragments of matter. There is humility in realizing that mountains drift more slowly than our entire empires rise and collapse, and yet they endure longer. A single tectonic plate crosses centimeters each year, but in that glacial pace lies millions of years of motion, outlasting countless generations. Skyscrapers crumble faster than mountains move. Cities vanish more quickly than deltas shift. We live aligned to hours and calendars, yet the Earth holds an entirely different scale. Could it be that our unease in contemplating deep time comes from sensing how small we are within it, how little even memory can resist erosion? And if memory too becomes dust, then we must ask what it means to remember at all. Perhaps permanence was never possible. Perhaps memory was always meant to scatter, like mountains dispersing into valleys, like rivers carrying sediment into seas. Not because the past is lost, but because the Earth insists on transformation. What we call forgetting may simply be the way time carries memory forward, erasing one shape to allow another. Could it be that even forgetting is a form of remembering, simply one we cannot read? Civilization against deep time looks fragile, almost invisible. And yet, from another view, it glows impossibly bright. A thin line of technofossils, a chemical shift in atmosphere, a sudden band marked with isotopes, our presence will appear in the strata. Not long, not wide, but unmistakable. For those who read the Earth's book 100 million years hence, there will be a sharp mark, the human moment. Perhaps that is enough. Perhaps being remembered in any way, however incomplete, already places us inside the same quiet story as trilobites and ammonites, forests that turn to coal, corals folded into limestone. We too become chapter, no more and no less. And yet, if even our cities, our sky-reaching towers, our most enduring works will become dust in time, then what happens to the oceans that outlast us, vast shifting mirrors that once swallowed continents whole and may one day turn themselves into deserts of silence? For what appears eternal in our eyes, the sea that stretches to every horizon, has also been temporary countless times before. Oceans open, swell, close, and recede, their very existence bound to the patient drift of continents. Where there is water now, there may one day be dunes. Where waves crash endlessly today, silence may fall in the sweep of desert wind. Seas have risen and vanished in cycles older than imagination. Plate tectonics opens great rifts, and water rushes in, birthing oceans where land once was. Yet over time, the same forces close them again, compressing their basins, draining them away. The Tethys Ocean, once vast between Africa and Asia, is gone, folded into the memory of the Mediterranean and the high rocks of the Himalayas. The once immense Panthalassa was fractured as continents broke apart. Even the Atlantic, so wide we cannot picture its absence, is destined to close eventually, its spreading ridges reversing course as drift collapses into new collision. Could it be that all oceans are only guests of deep time, visiting the surface for a few 100 million years before dissolving into history? When seas retreat, silence is left behind. The former seabed begins to desiccate, winds scouring the plain into dunes, sand piling where coral once grew. Salt pans, shimmering mirrors of white, reveal where water crystallized into stillness. Fossils of marine creatures lie stranded, reminders that abundance once filled the void. And in time, even those echoes erode, leaving nothing of the sea but the memory locked within stone. Is it possible that deserts today, the Sahara, the Kalahari, the Australian outback, are less wastelands than inheritance? The fossils found within their rocks suggest that each one was once ocean, each one an archive now drained, each one a desert that remembers tides. The climate, too, bends to these transformations. Oceans regulate air, storing heat, guiding storms, sending rains across continents. When they vanish, patterns change. Dry winds carve new geographies, ecosystems vanish, and life must adapt or surrender to silence. Entire worlds of plants and animals rise or fall with the shifting positions of land and sea. Perhaps deserts are not emptiness, but transformations waiting to be recognized. They are not voids where life has failed. They are the shadows of vanished seas, emerging because the earth insists on moving forward. Entropy writes this story too. Dunes march slowly, covering valleys, erasing memories of tides. Yet within each grain of sand lies the chemistry of the ocean it once belonged to. Calcium from shells, silica from plankton skeletons, salts left behind like faint signatures of water. The desert is not void but testimony, its silence filled with the past it carries invisibly. Could it be that every desert is still an ocean, only shifted in form, only silenced for now? And if oceans today can become deserts tomorrow, what then of deserts in far futures? Perhaps with continental collisions, new rifts will open and water will return, filling again the silence with wave and tide. Memory flows both ways. Oceans become deserts, and deserts one day, perhaps, return to sea. Nothing is final. Everything is rewritten. So when we look at oceans and imagine their permanence, or gaze at deserts and imagine their absence of life, we are reading only one page of the story. Each is connected, each transforming, each waiting in cycles that do not end. Maybe permanence was never the promise. Maybe the promise was always change. And yet, if deserts are only seas in waiting, if oceans themselves are only temporary guests, then what of the gaps we cannot yet see? The missing pages of the planet's maps, the empty records where time itself seems to fall silent? For as much as we piece together the chronicles of the Earth, there are vast absences, intervals without fossils, stretches without stone, eras erased by erosion or drawn down into mantle heat. These spaces are as much a part of the story as the layers we can hold in our hands. Some parts of Earth's history do not speak at all. They remain as silence, and yet that silence is not emptiness. It is presence of another kind. Geologists name these absences unconformities, the broken seams where layers of time are missing. A cliff may show bands of limestone upon sandstone, and between them millions of vanished years, an entire chapter erased, an interval of erosion instead of preservation. In the Grand Canyon, one unconformity spans over 1 billion years, known as the Great Unconformity, where rock that once was has disappeared, leaving no archive. 1 billion years gone, or perhaps not gone, but hidden beyond our reach. What happened in that gap? What mountains rose and fell? What oceans opened? What lives were born and extinguished in silence? We cannot know. And maybe it is this unknowing that humbles us most. Silence, after all, is not the opposite of memory. It is part of memory. The earth remembers selectively, and the gaps themselves speak. Not through content, but through absence. Could it be that we are meant to read silence as actively as we read stone? That erasure itself is a memory, not of detail, but of process. Perhaps every missing layer tells us simply, time moved here, unseen. Time passed, patient, immense, but without leaving trace. And still, we lean closer. Through isotopic signatures in surviving rock, we glimpse faint shadows of the missing. Oxygen ratios remind us of climates that are no longer recorded in sediment. Strontium trails hint at vanished rivers. Magnetic minerals, faintly aligned, suggest shifting poles. But these are fragments, half-words from a page torn away. A map drawn in fragments is not incomplete. It is precisely what existence offers us. Mystery is not a flaw in the record. It is the breadth of the record itself. Perhaps, then, we should wonder differently. Not what did we lose, but what does absence give us? Is it possible that mystery itself is a kind of sanctuary, the place where imagination enters, where humility awakens? If the earth showed us everything plainly, unbroken, without silence, we might never notice our own fragility. But because gaps exist, because unanswerable questions hum between the layers, we are invited into awe. Maybe not knowing is part of the gift. And when we stand before cliffs or cores, when we look upon blank spaces between strata, we are reminded that life, too, contains unconformities. There are eras of ourselves we cannot recall, days lost to forgetfulness, years that blur. And yet these too shape us. Silence is part of memory, not separate from it. What if the Earth's erasures are mirrors of our own, reminding us that completeness is never required for truth, that gaps do not diminish a life, but deepen it? To map silence is not to erase the unknown, but to honor it. Scientists mark the absences, label them, respect them without claiming mastery. So too, perhaps, should we walk through life with reverence for the spaces we cannot fill, for the landscapes that do not tell us all. Because in the end, silence itself is a form of presence, subtle, spacious, and essential. And yet, if mystery itself breathes in these gaps, if even silence is a voice, then what of the spirals of life and stone entwined within those spaces, the patterns of renewal that echo again and again across vanished ages? For when the fossil record is laid bare, it does not offer a simple arc of progress. It speaks instead in repetitions, in cycles of loss and renewal, collapse and rebirth. Entire epochs end, yet others take their place, life rising from silence as though pulled upward by some unseen spiral. Perhaps the earth itself moves not in straight lines, but in patterns that curve back into themselves, repeating themes, shifting shapes, never exactly the same, but never entirely different. The fossil record shows this rhythm clearly. Trilobites dominated the seas for millions of years, spreading across ancient oceans, and then, abruptly, most were gone. Coral reefs flourished in warm Paleozoic waters, then withered away during mass extinctions, only to return later in different forms, building new skeletons out of carbon and calcium. Dinosaurs ruled the land in extravagant variety until one sudden silence closed their chapter. Mammals, once small and hidden in shadows, took their place, filling empty niches as though the planet had reset its stage. Over and over, life does not simply endure, it moves through collapse and rebirth, a spiral rising from endings into beginnings. Geology echoes the same. Supercontinents emerge, drift, fracture, and reform. Mountains rise from collisions, erode, and then rise again in new collisions elsewhere. Oceans open and close, the very basins of life filling and draining in a rhythm as repetitive as breathing. It is as though life and land are drawn into the same spiral, entangled in cycles that neither can escape. Could it be that the earth itself is spiral by nature, always curving back into itself, always reshaping into echoes of what it once was? Spirals appear everywhere in life, the DNA coiled inside a cell, the shells of ammonites, the patterns of galaxies far beyond the earth. To see the earth's history as spiral is not metaphor alone, but recognition of recurrence, of geometry repeated across scales. Perhaps we too are spirals, our civilizations rising, expanding, collapsing, and reconfiguring in echo with the forces beneath our very feet. Maybe the familiar truth that history repeats itself is less a human failure than a planetary rhythm, the echo of geology mirrored in culture, memory, and time. There is beauty in this recurrence, but also a kind of humility. Life does not move toward perfection. It does not build to a final pinnacle that endures. Circles, resets, tries again. Extinction is never the last word. Renewal always follows, but not in the same form. A rainforest lost will not reappear exactly, but something forest-like will. A species erased will not return, but new species emerge to fill its absence. The spiral is not a closed circle. It progresses outward, weaving uniqueness into repetition. Could it be that eternity is not timelessness, but this never-ending spiral, where change and recurrence blend seamlessly? And yet, when we study these spirals, we find ourselves unsettled as well as comforted. If collapse is inevitable, then so is renewal, but if renewal is inevitable, so too is collapse. Our place within the spiral is fragile. Like trilobites or ammonites, we may flourish for a time, until extinction erases our chapter, leaving fragments, technofossils, a dark layer in the strata. Does it comfort us to know that something else will rise after, that life itself cannot be silenced? Or does it deepen our sense of impermanence, to realize we are only one coil in an endless helix, destined to yield? And still, even with this fragility, awe persists. For in every spiral lies continuity without sameness, persistence without permanence. The earth does not cling to what it was. It allows endings, and in endings begins again. Perhaps this is why fossils are so haunting. They show us creatures utterly alien, and yet familiar because we recognize the pattern. The spiral's curvature carries them forward into us. We are their echo, as those who will follow are ours. There is a whisper in this thought, like a lullaby carried through deep time. Maybe nothing is ever entirely gone. The forms vanish. The details dissolve. The memory becomes fragmentary. But the spiral carries essence forward, weaving new lives out of the dust of old, sculpting landscapes from the ruins of what collapsed before. Maybe not because the past is preserved intact, but because it is transmuted. Memory is not a photograph. It is a spiral. And yet, if even extinction and renewal trace a spiral, if life and stone both move through cycles that never resolve into an ending, then what of dust itself? The smallest fragments of memory ground from shell and bone and mountain, drifting onward into clouds and silence, awaiting their next return? Because sooner or later, even the greatest landscapes dissolve. Mountains grind themselves down under rain, wind, and ice. Fossils once sharp in their outlines erode until only faint impressions remain. Shorelines collapse into the sea, their cliffs fractured into sand, their boundaries drawn and redrawn 1,000 times. What endures from all this change are fragments, dust, the smallest unit of memory. Dust carries everything. It is not one thing, but many layered into one. The powder of old seashells, the debris of vanished forests, the splinter of volcanic eruptions, the shard of meteorites showered in from the sky. It drifts across the air almost invisible, and yet it connects continents. Dust from the Sahara crosses the Atlantic, nourishing the Amazon rainforest. Dust from volcanoes shades the sky, altering climates thousands of miles away. Atmospheric currents sweep it in spirals around the planet, scattering memory across oceans, rivers, and deserts. Not because dust means to remember, but because nothing leaves without leaving something behind. And within dust, chemistry persists, unassuming but undeniable. Calcium, carbon, silicates, iron, all threaded with isotopic clues of their origin, whispering what climate shaped them, which rock produced them, what cycle carried them to air. This is memory stripped of form but not of essence. A mountain transformed into grains, yet still a mountain in signature. A living creature long ground down, yet still noticeable through the ratios of oxygen in the powders of its bones. Could it be that dust is where memory, at its most fragile, lingers the longest, not as image, but as potential, always becoming something else? Because dust does not merely rest. It seeds clouds. Suspended above us, it invites water vapor to gather, to condense, to fall again as rain. Dust makes rain possible. The smallest, most eroded memory of stone sustains the rhythm of life anew. Perhaps this is the Earth's most poetic lesson. Even the worn down, even the forgotten can feed the next beginning. Memory becomes dust. Dust becomes rain. Rain nourishes forests and rivers that will one day grind again into dust. The cycle is not despair, it is continuity. And in this gentle loop we are participants too. The air we breathe carries dust older than humanity. The food we grow owes itself to dust borne on winds from distant continents. Even within our bodies, fragments of ancient matter circulate, traces of stars and mountains long gone, folded invisibly into our cells. Is it possible that dust is the most democratic form of memory, touched by all things, belonging to everyone and no one, scattered and shared until it is nearly impossible to separate origin from destination? Philosophers once said that we are dust, and to dust we shall return. But perhaps that was not lament. Perhaps it was recognition of belonging. Dust is not the erasure of memory, but its widest distribution. It ensures nothing is kept entirely intact, nothing clings to its form forever, and yet nothing is lost to oblivion either. Reduced into near nothing, memory becomes everywhere. A fine veil of existence suspended eternally in motion. And yet, if dust can feed clouds and clouds bring rain, what larger rivers of motion might dust be part of? Currents of continents themselves drifting like liquid stone, carrying memory forward not only in particles scattered in air, but in bodies of land on the move across the skin of the planet? For if we lean closer, we begin to see the earth as one vast river, not of water, but of stone. Not fleeting like streams we know, but flowing slowly, almost imperceptibly, across spans of deep time. Entire continents, our ground, our home, our cities, floating upon a mantle that is never still. We are already passengers, adrift upon this river of continents, whether we sense it or not. At first, the idea seems impossible. How can something so solid, granite cliffs, wide plains, rooted mountain chains, be moving? Yet the science whispers otherwise. Plate tectonics, the ceaseless drifting of the lithosphere, reveals that what feels rooted is always in motion. Africa edges northward, pressing into Europe. The Americas pull slowly away from one another along the spine of the mid-Atlantic ridge. Australia drifts north, inch by inch, like a raft drawn toward unseen currents. They do not choose their direction and have no destination but change itself. What if the continents are less landscapes and more vessels, drifting as part of a larger current too vast for us to touch? To understand this river, imagine time sped up until millions of years flash like seconds. We would see continents swirl and collide, break apart and scatter, always rearranging like fragments in slow whirlpools. Pangaea forms, splits, drifts into pieces. Gondwana dissolves, its lands scattered, later to find new unions. Oceans surge and vanish, their shorelines reshaped over and over. The river never rests. Its eddies are the supercontinents, its rapids the burst of volcanic arcs, its quiet stretches the long drifts where nothing seems to change but everything does. Always moving, always reshaping, always carrying the memory of what came before into new configurations. And like a river, it leaves marks upon its banks. Each collision raises mountains. Each separation opens seas. The Himalayas, like spires against the sky, are only the latest foam upon this endless current, raised where India pressed northward into Asia, carried there by drift. The Andes rise along South America's western shore, stone-dammed against the subduction of plates. Every torn coastline, every folded peak, every rippling desert is an inscription of the river's flow. Is it possible that all landscapes we know are only momentary eddies in a current we cannot escape? Fossils, too, become passengers in this drifting. Shells forged in oceans are lifted miles above sea level, folded into mountain summits. Forests once growing in tropical belts are preserved beneath polar snows, carried by latitude from warmth to cold. In their silence, they remind us that memory itself flows within this river. By following their trail, scientists map not only where life existed, but where land has been. The river carries memory not just in matter, but in the relocation of entire ecosystems across the face of the planet. There is wonder in recognizing that we, too, are adrift upon these currents. Our homes, our cities, our histories, all are passengers upon the same restless rafts. Each generation imagines land as permanent, solid beneath our feet, but permanence is only illusion. Not because our perception is wrong, but because human time is too brief to notice the drift. It is only when fossils and isotopes remind us of migrations measured in hundreds of millions of years that the illusion cracks, and the flow becomes undeniable. We live upon rafts of stone, carried patiently along the great river of continents, unaware of the movement below us. Yet what does it mean to float on a river that has no mouth, no end? Rivers we know empty into seas, but this river of continents simply circles, collides, reshapes, in endless repetition. Perhaps it is more spiral than stream, carrying Earth's memory forward in cycles. Each one new yet familiar, creation and erasure woven together. Maybe deep time itself can only be understood as a current, a drift without beginning or conclusion. If we let the thought linger, the metaphor grows intimate. To be alive upon this drifting continent is to be leaf upon water, unaware of the shore it once came from, unaware of what lies ahead, knowing only the flow. And still, this flow sustains us. It sculpts climates, creates soils, births coasts, erases deserts, reshapes winds. Life is braided into it whether we notice or not. The river does not ask for our awareness to carry us, only time. And still we ask, if continents are this restless, if they drift like rafts and reform like waves, is the earth itself a river basin, its stone surface simply the expression of a current too vast to measure? Could it be that the planet is not only memory but motion itself? Memory drifting, folding, reshaping, endlessly carried downstream into futures we will never see. And yet, if Earth itself is a river of stone, drifting and rewriting its channels over billions of years, then what happens when this river dreams, when the planet is not only memory and motion, but presence, a kind of living identity that we have only begun to imagine? Some scientists have wondered aloud, not as certainty but as speculation, whether the Earth itself may be a self-regulating memory, a system vast enough to sense, to adapt, to breathe in its own way. They called it Gaia, not as a goddess, not as myth, but as a metaphor, and perhaps more than metaphor. Could a planet remember itself, not in fragments alone, but all at once? The Gaia hypothesis suggests that Earth behaves like a living system. Its oceans, atmosphere, land, and biosphere do not simply coexist. They respond to each other, tuning conditions for life to endure. Think of oxygen rising in the air, balanced by forests and seas. Think of volcanic carbon exhaled into skies, later drawn down by stone and by plants. Feedback loops stretch across scales. The growth of algae cooling seas, the retreat of forests warming air, ice reflecting sunlight to preserve cold. Each part is not isolated. Each is part of a whole. Perhaps this whole is what we have been sensing all along when we whisper that the planet breathes. And yet, perhaps it is less about consciousness than about connection. The Earth may not know itself the way we know ourselves. It does not speak, it does not declare. But through countless interactions, it adjusts. Atmospheres shift within limits, oceans cycle nutrients, climates resist extremes. Life itself expands and changes, yet the planet remains within ranges where life can still persist. Could that balancing be memory? Could it be that Earth remembers the dangers of its past, encoded not in words but in feedbacks woven into its systems, preventing the worst from repeating as it once did? Maybe it is not foresight or awareness, but continuity. The persistence of conditions carried forward by interlocking arms of stone, water, and air. If we lean closer into this idea, it feels almost like listening to sleep itself. The Earth has no wakefulness in the way we imagine, and yet it reacts. It shivers in quakes. It sighs in volcanic breath. It circulates heat in the mantle the way we circulate oxygen in blood. The networks of rivers mirror veins. The cycles of water mirror respiration. The spread of forests mirror thought branching outward. A metaphor, yes, but perhaps no less true for being metaphor. Maybe the planet's dreaming is not fantasy. Maybe it is the motion of countless cycles braided together, a kind of planetary unconscious writing itself into time. Fossil records support the depth of this dream. Catastrophic extinctions altered climate, wrecked ecosystems, and yet the planet stabilized again. The Permian collapse did not end Earth's capacity for life. Renewal followed. The the asteroid that struck at the end of the Cretaceous threw skies into shadow, stripped ecosystems bare, and yet from that silence new species rose. The Earth did not resist collapse. It folded collapse into renewal, dreamlike, reweaving what was lost into something entirely different. Could it be that what appears as a nightmare in one epoch becomes another chapter in the planet's endless dream? And still, mystery remains. If the Earth regulates itself through these systems, is it alive in ways we cannot measure? Or do we risk giving identity to what is only mechanism? Maybe it does not matter. Whether Gaia is true in the biological sense or only poetic truth, the thought leads us inward, inviting us to ask what it means to exist within such a system. We are not beside Earth. We are within it. Each breath we take ties us to its dream. Each exhalation contributes to its balance. We are entangled in the dreaming of the planet, whether we notice or not. What if we are not only listeners to the Earth's story, but also participants in its dreaming? Could our civilizations, our emissions, our movements of soil and sea be folded into the dream as surely as volcanic eruptions and glacier cycles? Perhaps we misinterpret our impact as separate from the planet, when in truth even the disturbances we make are simply part of the feedback, the shifting of one system adjusting into another. The future Earth will remember us, not as we hope, not as a proud monument, but as part of its atmospheric chemistry, its scattered fossils, its altered balance of soils and seas. We are a dream it will shift through and then remake when we are gone. And yet, to consider the Earth as dreaming is not to place us outside, but to soften us back into awe. It reminds us we are not masters of permanence, but passengers within a vast metabolism. Maps, fossils, deserts, mountains, all are threads of its dreaming. The silence of extinction, the renewal after collapse, the cycles that spiral forward, all are phases of the same vast sleep. Perhaps even now, the Earth turns beneath us not as stone alone, but as a dreamer who contains us, who remembers through feedback and silence, who carries us onward without intention. And yet, if this dreaming presence exists, quietly shaping and reshaping itself, then what of us, what of our own traces within that dream, the future fossils of humankind waiting to be puzzled over in the ages that will follow? Fossils are not chosen. Life does not decide which of its forms will pass into permanence. It is accident, condition, coincidence that allows bone to harden into stone, leaf to imprint into shale, shell to leave its memory within limestone. So too it will be with us. Most of what we create will vanish, swallowed by entropy, erased by weather and wave. But fragments, tiny and startling, will endure, and perhaps far in the future, when the river of continents has drifted on, when Amasia or some other union of land has risen anew, these fragments will lie buried, awaiting discovery. Imagine geologists millions of years hence, not human perhaps, but some consciousness shaped by life that has grown from ages we cannot imagine. They may split stone to find the strangest of inclusions, unnatural layers of plastic hardened into technofossils, concrete pavements remineralized into something resembling limestone, fragments of steel oxidized yet still delicate in form, microchips sealed in sediment like curious shells with strange inner patterns. They may hold a device in their appendages and wonder whether it was plant, mineral, or animal. They may puzzle at circuitry's geometry the way we puzzle at trilobite ridges, trying to read mystery from pattern. And just as we infer behavior from footprints pressed into ancient mud, they may wonder, what were these beings? They might imagine us incorrectly. Perhaps they will think our towers were nests, our highways were burrows, our vehicles were creatures in themselves. Will they see our fragments as evidence of intelligence, or as accidental mineral quirks no different from crystal or coral? It may not matter. What survives of us will not capture who we are. It will reflect us only through matter, through the residue of what we placed upon the earth. Maybe remembrance itself has always been this way, not in essence but in fragments. Not because history is flawed, but because history cannot hold everything. Even now, deep within sediments and cores, our memory is being fixed. Radioactive isotopes from nuclear experiments form a sharp boundary, a geologic line speaking of one brief century. Plastics spread through soil and sea. Carbon spikes in the atmosphere mark our burning of ancient forests and fuels. These are not erasures, they are inscriptions. We are not only inhabitants but authors of a new layer in Earth's story. Whether permanent or fleeting, it already belongs to the archive of stone. Could it be that even when we vanish, our memory will continue, not as legacy we planned, but as residue we could not erase? And yet, what will last is not only the physical. Climate itself carries our signature. The gases we release into atmosphere alter weather, alter ice, alter seas, just as ancient oxygen from photosynthetic microbes altered everything that lived billions of years ago. In isotopic ratios of the future, our presence will be unmistakable. We are a chemical shift no less visible than the asteroid's iridium layer at the close of the Cretaceous. Extinction lines, warming seas, deserts expanding where forests once stood. All will speak of us more clearly than any language carved on stone. But perhaps the greatest wonder is not whether our memory will persist, but how it will be interpreted. For interpretation changes as much as preservation. We look at fossils and wonder whether we understand them truly. Did trilobites see the world as we imagine? Did forests of the Devonian look as shadowed and green as we believe? Or are our visions romantic reflections, reshaped by our own needs? Perhaps one day, distant minds will do the same with us, imagining our civilizations from fragments, creating myths to fill the blank spaces of our record. Maybe memory, even fossilized, is always half-truth, always dream. There is humility here, but also a certain quiet comfort. To know that we cannot control how or even if we will be remembered is to let go of the weight of permanence. Just as all life that has come before us rests quietly in layers, plants pressed as coal seams, shells curled into limestone, creatures inked as shadows in shale, we too will take our place. Even if future beings misread us, even if they mistake wires for veins and circuitry for leaf, perhaps that is enough. To have left any form of record at all is to have belonged. And yet, perhaps it is worth wondering what does not fossilize, what cannot endure into stone. Our voices, our dreams, the warmth of connection, the memory of thought, the fleeting presence of love. These are not carried into strata, not transformed into mineral, not written into isotopes. They vanish. And yet, are they truly gone? When we speak, the vibrations move air, and that movement is energy, folded eventually into the chaos of the atmosphere. When we love, chemicals exchange, molecules linger, affecting the world in ways that ripple outward in subtle chains. Maybe, like all else, they too are folded into the Earth's dreaming, even if no geologist will ever uncover them. So we drift with stone. We act, we build, we falter, we dissolve. And in time, pieces of us will linger as strange relics, puzzling whoever comes after. Our permanence is not in eternity, but in participation. We exist within the spiral, pressed into its memory, written not as who we were but that we were. And perhaps that is enough, to be layered into the archives of the planet, one more chapter among millions of chapters. And yet, if our memory will become scattered fragments awaiting interpretation, then what of the skies themselves? The way mountain ranges and drifting continents have already shaped winds, sculpted the path of clouds, and etched their signature into the air above? For as much as the earth writes its history into stone, it also presses its hand into the sky, redrawing patterns of weather with each rise of a mountain, each shift of land. The planet's surface sculpts its atmosphere the way a riverbank guides a current, and so the air we breathe, the clouds, rains, storms, all carry geological memory. Mountains lift winds. Air travels until it meets a wall of stone, rising suddenly, cooling into condensation, breaking into rain. On one side of the range, greenery thrives. On the other, deserts bloom in silence. The Andes hold moisture against their western slopes, feeding forests, while the east lies drier, reshaped by the rain shadow. The Himalayas guide monsoons, pulling warm air upward until it spills summer rain across the plains of India. Without the rise of those peaks, climates would be utterly different, rivers never fed, civilizations never nurtured. Could it be that mountains are not only landscapes, but architects of weather biographies we so easily take for granted? Even the direction of winds owes itself to drifting continents. When Gondwana fractured and the South Atlantic opened, new currents emerged, pulling Antarctic waters into a circumpolar stream that cooled an entire hemisphere. Climate shifted, ice sheets grew. When continents crowd toward the poles, their presence seeds glaciers. When they scatter toward warmth, skies heat, air thickens, deserts widen. The sky is not independent. It is drawn directly by the fingerprint of stone. And yet these changes are written subtly, invisibly, through isotope trails, trapped air bubbles, chemical ratios within snow and sea. We can read the very path of winds long gone by studying oxygen in ancient shells, carbon in stalagmites, deuterium in layers of ice. A cloud drifting 10,000 years ago over a vanished forest still left its chemical footprint, faint but discoverable, evidence that the sky itself has archives, its memory entangled with rock and water. Could it be that every storm leaves a trace, not erased but folded quietly into mineral and ice, waiting for us to lean close enough to listen? There is something tender in this thought, that the sky above us is not only ephemeral, not only vanishing. Clouds may scatter, winds may shift, a storm may dissolve into an empty horizon, but in chemistry, in sediments, in isotopes, the ghost of weather persists. A summer breeze feels transient, yet even it may alter the surface it brushes, carrying dust, shaping ripples upon water, scattering seeds into new ground. Perhaps the most fleeting things leave the deepest remnants, not because they persist in form, but because they ripple outward into consequences embedded in stone. As continents continue to shift, their dance will keep sculpting new skies. Amasia, the imagined supercontinent of the future, will possess weather beyond our comprehension. Perhaps vast deserts in its core, furious storms along its endless coasts, monsoons swollen larger than any today. The story of its sky will be written not in isolation, but in the collision of continents, the folds of mountains, the closing of seas. Weather itself will bear the stamp of geology, as it always has. So when we look upward, we are gazing unknowingly into stone's reflection. The shapes of clouds, the rhythm of seasons, the path of winds, all carry the imprint of continents and folds. The sky is carved, not in permanence but in motion, like a sculpture continually reshaped by invisible hands. And if the earth remembers itself through rocks and fossils, perhaps the sky is its voice, changing always, never still, the whisper of stone translated into air. And yet, if even the sky is written by the drift of land, sculpted by mountains, carved by stone, then what of time itself, the slowest clock of all measured not in hours or seasons, but in the near-eternal drift of the continents themselves? Clocks, as we know them, tick in minutes and hours, reminders of brevity. But the earth keeps another clock, vast and patient. Its hands move in inches per year, less perceptible than the growth of a tree, less noticeable than the flow of a glacier, and yet unstoppable. This clock is the movement of continents, the shifting of plates upon the mantle, a measure of eternity that no human lifetime can witness fully. To imagine it speed up time. What was immobile becomes liquid. Continents glide like rafts upon invisible water. Africa leans into Europe, closing seas. The Americas separate, their coastlines stretching apart, exposing ridges of volcanism as if stitching new crust before our eyes. Australia pushes northward, drifting into future collisions. Antarctica sits isolated in its silent orbit, shaping an entire hemisphere's climate by remaining at the pole. At this scale, nothing stands still. All ground is in motion. The Earth's clock does not lose seconds, does not falter. It keeps time in geologic silence, impartial, serene, unhurried. And yet, within this slowness, everything we know exists. Civilizations rise and fall against the backdrop of plates crossing only a few centimeters. Forests bloom, ice ages advance and retreat, deserts crawl outward and then collapse. All in the time it takes a continent to shift barely the width of a hand. To us, drifting plates are an abstraction, too slow to touch our lives directly. But in deep time, They are the beat, the metronome, the grand measure that gives rhythm to oceans, to mountains, to climates, to life itself. Could it be that eternity is not timelessness, but this steady ticking we cannot hear? The record of this clock is embedded in stone. Magnetic minerals freeze in alignment with Earth's polarity, which flips over the ages. These stripes on the seafloor reveal the widening of oceans, perfect patterns etched in basalt. Fossil shifts trace ancient migrations of land, coral growing where poles once were, coal beds lying in what are now frozen places. Every trace, every clue, speaks to this hidden metronome. The continents keep time not in minutes, but in movements, in vast rearrangements that take eons to unfold. Perhaps we need such a reminder that our sense of permanence is misaligned. We structure our days into fleeting hours, but Earth never rushes. As patience outlasts species, ecosystems, epochs, what seems eternal to us, mountains, seas, even entire civilizations, are to this slow clock only passing seconds. It reminds us that our urgency is ours alone. The ground beneath us does not hurry. It does not pause. It moves with impartial grace, unnoticed and immense. And yet, within this impartiality, there is quiet meaning. Because though the continents move too slowly for our lifetimes, their cumulative drift gives shape to everything around us. Where deserts spread, where storms gather, where rivers flow, all are influenced by the clockwork drift of land. Our very lives, the crops we plant, the rains we rely upon, the air we breathe, are tied to motions we cannot see. Time moves through us whether we measure it or not. Could it be that, in listening for this slow clock, we learn something essential about ourselves? That we are not outside time, but within it, living in its smallest fractions, carried by rhythms more enduring than memory? Maybe eternity is not unreachable after all. Maybe it simply lies beneath our feet, in stone that drifts with impartial patience, pressing forward into futures long beyond our own. And yet, if the slow clock of continents silently marks the march of eternity beneath us, then what of the echoes scattered all around? Those voices of vanished oceans and forests, fossils and civilizations, reverberating forever even as the hands of time keep on turning? The earth does not remember in single notes. It remembers in echoes, each sound overlapping, never wholly erased, never wholly clear. To listen is to find ourselves in a chorus both too vast and too incomplete to decipher. Everywhere around us, these echoes persist. Walk through a forest and beneath your feet are layers of soil enriched by trees long gone. Their trunks dissolved but their chemistry lingering still. The oxygen we breathe today is itself an echo of photosynthesis from ancient cyanobacteria, tiny lives billions of years old whose work has never ceased to shape our skies. The chalk cliffs of Dover whisper of seas once thick with plankton. Every pale grain the crushed bodies of creatures smaller than dust, together forming walls that gleam against the modern sea. Even silence is filled with resonance when we look close enough. Could it be that our world is never as new as it seems, that everything we touch is haunted softly by what came before? Fossils speak in direct echoes. A fern pressed into shale is a whisper of a forest that flourished in warmth, long since vanished but still present in contour, in form, in shadow preserved. The shells of ammonites spiral outward like frozen breaths of seas that no longer exist. Entire vanished oceans linger in the mineral composition of rocks, salt locked into layers, calcium preserved from reefs that never rose above light. Even the absence of fossils in certain stretches of sediment becomes its own echo, a silence that tells of extinction, of emptiness, of life erased but still acknowledged in the record of its absence. But echoes are not only written into rocks. They move invisibly in the atmosphere itself. Carbon released into the air today will still be resonating 1,000 years from now, blending into the chemistry of the sky, changing patterns of heat and storm. Dust that rises in the Sahara will fall in the Amazon, carrying the memory of one land into another. Radioisotopes scattered by human hands will mark the boundary of our age long after our words are gone. Could it be that every act, small or vast, is destined to echo across time, even if we never hear its return? And like sound carried across canyons, these echoes do not fade evenly. Some linger longer than others, resonating across ages. Forests rise and vanish, but coal seems preserve their presence millions of years onward, echoing in the fuel we still burn. Civilizations crumble, but shards of pottery, fragments of glass, and walls of stone last far longer, whispering stories into the ears of future archaeologists. Echoes travel differently depending on what carries them. Hard stone extends the message while soft tissue does not. Silence hollows some echoes, amplifies others, and in the end no echo is ever complete. Perhaps this is why the world feels at times like a memory, why to sit in desert silence or mountain stillness feels uncanny, as though faces are present though unseen, as though time itself is trying to speak. It is not our imagination alone. We are surrounded by imprints that resonate beyond their original moment. Each forest carries resonance of former forests. Each ocean carries remnants of earlier seas. Each wind carries dust from other lives, other landscapes. Maybe there is nothing truly original. Maybe every moment is a layering of echoes, all repeating at once. And if we think of our lives in this way, we too are echoes of those who came before, of dust recycled again and again through bodies. Bones, water, molecules, all borrowed from the chorus, all destined to return to it. Not because we choose it, but because it is the way memory moves forward. When we speak, when we breathe, we extend tiny echoes into the air, momentary vibrations that ripple outward and then disappear, folding into other echoes too faint for us to notice. Could it be that nothing we do is ever truly gone? It joins a continuity far larger than us, another strand of the infinite resonance. The unsettling beauty of echoes is that they never resolve completely. One call bounces against another, returning blurred and overlapping, never quite the same as the original. In this, the Earth is not a single story, but many stories retelling themselves across distance, merging, fragmenting, reappearing. We cannot trace them perfectly because perfection was never the point. The point is persistence. The point is continuation. The earth hums with what has been, and we hear only fragments of the song. And yet, if echoes never end, if every voice of ocean, forest, stone, and human lingers somewhere within the resonance of the planet, then what else waits beneath us, still unheard, resting in the silence of stone until drift and erosion bring it back into daylight once more? For the earth does not reveal everything at once. Most of its story lies hidden, folded deep into strata we may never touch. Beneath our feet, memories accumulate quietly, some carried downward into the mantle, some sealed in layers far too deep for us to uncover without patience, some erased on the surface yet preserved in places we have not yet looked. What still waits beneath us? The question is as infinite as time, and perhaps it is the Earth's most enduring mystery. Every layer of rock is both history learned and history withheld. Fossils show us fragments, yet how many creatures thrived and dissolved without leaving trace? Entire ecosystems could have flourished, unknown to us, erased not by catastrophe but by the ordinary processes of weathering and subduction. Gaps in the geological record, the unconformities, cover not thousands, but millions of years, blank pages where something surely happened, yet nothing remains to mark it. Did forests rise and fall there? Did climates shift abruptly, winds turn strange, seas bloom with forms now impossible to imagine? Or could it even be that something more complex was born and erased, a civilization predating us, swallowed wholly by entropy before it could be remembered? It may be improbable, but it is not unimaginable. The Earth's silence is full of invitations like this. Questions too deep to be resolved, mysteries alive in their refusal to vanish. Waiting beneath us are also seas we cannot reach, aquifers and reservoirs older than memory, carrying waters untouched by light for millions of years. Within them, microbial life persists, hidden oases thriving in darkness, sustaining themselves on chemicals drawn from rock. Could it be that these beings are older echoes of what life once was, carrying forward lineages at the edge of invisibility? Entire worlds of living history, already beneath us, already here, yet still unknown. Maybe what we call discovery is never finding new things, but noticing what has always been. There is also the mantle itself, unreachable, a place where continents have descended, erased from surface but not from existence. Slabs of crust lie suspended within, slowly mixing, but perhaps not yet dissolved. Vast buried continents hidden beneath the surface, ghosts of landmasses long forgotten. Geophysicists call these structures blobs or anomalies. Yet what if they are more than anomalies? What if they are chapters waiting for return, fragments of lost surfaces one day to rise again, carrying their forgotten fossils upward like quiet gifts from the past? It is a strange comfort to think the planet both erases and preserves, burying its memory only to reveal it later in altered form. And then there are isotopes, locked into minerals, scattered in crystals as time markers of processes we cannot feel. Zircon, that ancient gemstone older than continents, tells us of conditions for billion years ago, when the Earth was young, oceans first beginning their endless cycle. These crystals are whispers from a time no longer accessible, carried forward in grains that outlast continents themselves. They wait beneath us not to be erased, but to be noticed, to be read by those patient enough to listen. Could it be that all the secrets of our planet rest already here, folded into matter so small we mistake it for silence? And yet the most haunting mystery that waits beneath is not what we might find, but what we cannot. For entropy ensures much is gone forever. Species whose bodies eroded before they could harden. Civilizations, if they had ever arisen, that were swallowed and subducted without leaving any artifact behind. Landscapes erased so completely they cannot even be imagined. What waits beneath may not be recovered at all. Mystery does not exist only in what might be revealed, but also in what will always remain concealed. Perhaps this is the truest gift of the Earth's memory, that it withholds as much as it shares, reminding us that humility is as essential as curiosity. When we touch stone, when we read the strata, when we breathe isotopic air preserved within ice, we are listening not only to what has been revealed, but also to what remains buried. Silence itself becomes presence. Every fossil is not only a record of what survived, but a reminder of all that did not. Every ridge is not only proof of drift, but also erasure of places gone. What waits beneath is not merely information. It is wonder itself, humbling, eternal, alive in its refusal to surrender all its secrets. And perhaps we do not need the Earth to tell us everything. Perhaps the mystery is what makes the story lasting. If one day we were to know it all, if every secret rose into daylight, the planet would no longer breathe wonder. It might become static, fixed, permanent. But permanence and completion were never part of its nature. Motion, silence, absence, incompleteness. These are the conditions that let all remain alive. We lean in. We wonder. We ask again and again. What still waits beneath us? Each time we ask, the silence answers only with presence, never with conclusion. So we close where we began, in quiet questioning. The Earth remembers, but imperfectly. It reveals, but hesitantly. Its memory exists as stone and dust, as wind and ocean, as fossils and isotopes, as silences and gaps that are as rich as what they withhold. Mystery is not the flaw of this record, it is its soul. And to lean into it, slowly, gently, without the urgency of final answers, is to step into the true intimacy of geology. Knowing that beneath us lies an archive we will never fully finish reading, a dream we will never fully decipher. And yet, if so much waits still beneath us, timeless and alive in its silence, then what else might we have already forgotten? So completely that even the Earth itself no longer carries a trace?